Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, sometimes in life we react to an adverse situation in ways we never envisaged. I have a friend who woke up one night to find a strange man standing at the end of her bed. That has got to be one of the scariest things to happen to a young girl. She told me she didn't scream or cry out for help, as you would have expected her to have done. She doesn't actually even remember feeling fear. It was like she was overcome with a stoic sense of calm that surprised even her. Luckily, her brother in the next room overheard the man entering her bedroom. He sensed something untoward was going on, so he quickly called the police. The man was subsequently arrested. He had a long history of sexual assault behind him, so my friend had a lucky escape. I don't understand why I didn't scream, she told me. I was to discover that when an adverse experience happened in my own life, that I also didn't react in the way that I anticipated that I should react, in an adverse situation, that is. Indeed, all these years later, when I reflect on my reaction to this event, it is something that brings me a measure of shame, which is why the story has not been shared until now, which is easily 12 years after the event. At the time, I was living in Buffalo Grove in Chicago, Illinois, with my parents and my younger brother Cole. We were living in an updated colonial home, in a serene, peaceful, green leafy neighborhood, 40 minutes from the town's centre. And what is so great about this marvellous area is we're close to Buffalo Creek Forest Reserve and Potawatomi Woods. We have fabulous golf courses, bowling arcades and swimming opportunities here, along with marvellous places to eat, fabulous bakeries that sell the very best apple fritters you've ever tasted. I went to Buffalo Grove High School and would walk home from school every day, providing, of course, that the weather was good. We have a typical continental climate here in Chicago, which means we have cold winters, warm summers. But personally, I love the moderate temperatures of both spring and autumn here the most. Unfortunately, while Chicago has many plus sides to living here, like affordable living costs and amazing reliable public transport, we are a city with a higher crime rate, much more so than the national average, which is why growing up, I was exceedingly grateful that both my parents lived in such a congenial, tranquil part of the city, which is less predisposed to the consequences of crime. I was 20 years old when my mother asked me if I'd be interested in looking after my 5-year-old nephew, Ethan, as my aunt and uncle were going on an overseas trip to Italy, where they were spending time in Rome, Tuscany and Florence. They need someone to look after little Ethan, my mother had said. They live in Idaho. I've never been there, but I believe it's lovely. And what's more, they'll pay you generously for your time and trouble. They're not short of a bob or two. It'll be a fabulous break for you, being in the countryside and getting acquainted with your nephew. You can fly down a day earlier. I think that would be a great idea. The flights from Chicago to Idaho are about 3 hours, so you can learn about your nephew's routines before Liz and her husband Hugh finally leave for Italy. I was speaking to my sister Liz about it. She simply loves the idea of you taking care of your nephew, whom you've never met, of course. I don't know why it came to me, but I thought about how recently you've been complaining a lot about wanting to get out of Chicago for a while. Furthermore, you love kids, don't you? Liz wants to feel that she can leave Ethan, her son, in heedfully responsible hands. You fit the bill nicely, sweetheart. Furthermore, she says you can use her car, and even ride her horse Silver, provided you take Ethan along with you as well. Of course, it goes without saying, you mustn't leave your cousin unattended. I gather Silver's quite a beauty, a very well-behaved horse, so you can happily ride her together. Where exactly do they live in Idaho? Well, they live close to the town of Stanley, near the Sawtooth mountain range, where there's stunning hiking trails and beautiful hot springs, I gather. They have a small farm there, where they grow potatoes. My aunt and uncle had arranged for a taxi to pick me up from the Magic Valley Regional Airport, which is in Twin Falls, and about 149 miles from the city of Stanley. I felt excited, if not a little nervous and apprehensive about seeing my aunt again. The last time I'd seen her was 5 years prior at my grandmother's funeral, which was a very morbid, depressing affair, as there wasn't a dry eye in the church, as so many grieved her abrupt, unheralded passing. In truth, I was so upset about my grandmother's fortuitous death, a sudden, unexpected, inadvertent stroke that no one ever saw coming. I was so grief-stricken at the time that when I met Aunt Liz, I barely remembered her at all. Ironically, my mother chatted with her sister Liz every day, on Twitter and Facebook, so they were always in touch on social media. But it was such a pity we never connected much as a family, which was something both my mother and her sister Liz were desirous to change. We should be like other American families, my aunt would say. You hear about people travelling all across the country for Thanksgiving and Christmas to celebrate these festive celebratory occasions together. But we do bog all about getting together. We should be heartily ashamed of ourselves, as geographically between us there's only a 3-hour flight. Don't forget we're talking about some American families that actually loathe each other, but still manage to make the effort to get together for Christmas and Thanksgiving, dutifully making that effort to reconnect with each other every single year. We love each other to death, so what the heck is wrong with us? Our excuses are shamefully pitiful. Suffice to say, my aunt had frequently told my mother they lived in a beautiful part of the world. But honestly, as I sat back in the taxi, absorbing the transfixing mountain views, the undulating viridescent meadows ablaze with colourful wild flowers, the rugged sculptural landscape, the cobalt blue sky, the towering silhouettes of the vertical trees from my backseat window, I was beginning to realise that Liz had significantly downplayed, rather minimised how magnificent Idaho actually was. I couldn't for the life of me fathom as to why she would do this. Maybe she didn't want my mother to feel depressed and downcast about living in a bustling, busy city, as my mother adored the natural world, and pregnantly rather envied her sister for her rustic, relaxed, carefree, countrified lifestyle. She had tirelessly begged my father to leave his high-profile job in the city, to relocate to the countryside, to embrace a more relaxed way of living, and, of course, to be close to her sister Liz. But it looked unlikely to ever happen. My father loved Chicago. It was in his blood. He was hell-bent on staying there, like a resolute redwood tree that is not easily shifted. And with a father as stubborn as an ox, with a hide as tough as a rhino, a move to Idaho was not likely to be on the cards any time soon. But one could dream, couldn't one? And based on the exquisite views I was observing outside my window, I did fancy moving to this part of the world. "So you're from Chicago, are you, love?" says the taxi driver, once he picked me up from the airport and gently placed my suitcase in the back of the trunk, clearly surprised that I was travelling so light. But I saw no point in travelling with an excess of clothes. "That's right," I said politely. "Well, welcome to Idaho, the quintessential state with some of the lowest crime rates." "Really?" I said. "I didn't know that." "That's right, and if that's not good enough for you, we also have considerably good weather over here, although Boise has the best up here. In the mountains it does tend to get rather cold, and snowy in winter, of course." "I think it's always colder in winter when you live near the mountains. It can get very cold in Chicago as well during the winter." "I think this must be it," said the taxi driver, a while later, swiftly turning his vehicle through a wide-open wrought-iron gate with a sign that read, Birchwood Spud Farm. "Looks like you won't be running out of potatoes on your dinner plate staying here," the taxi driver chuckled. "No potato famines for you, I don't think. Best vegetable in the world, if you ask me. Especially mashed, fried, or roasted. And by the looks of things, this farm has got a plethora of potatoes." The driver was not wrong about that. It would seem that nestling cosily, about 50 feet from the left-hand side of the road, were long sprawling borders of raised uniform green heads, bountiful leaves that stretched out forever in a vertical straight column or trajectory that circumscribed the potato plants themselves. In the furthest distance, the plants were hedged in neatly by the distinctive perpendicular upstanding clusters of trees that curtained the bottommost parts of the field. The right-hand side of the road was spread-eagled with fabulous sweeping meadows, with knee-high grasses filled with a kaleidoscope of colourful wild flowers, and scattered liberally with occasional trees. The taxi rode smoothly down the slightly overgrown rugged driveway, towards an aesthetically pleasing farmhouse, easy on the eye, an attractive peach-coloured craftsman-styled home, with a low-pitched grey roof, overhanging eaves, heavy tapered columns, white-patterned window panes, and a covered porch. The peach colour rather reminded me of a rich orange sunset. Its flattering earthy colours magnified the natural flora and fauna of the landscape, complemented by a generous set-up of outbuildings, including a stable block, a garage, workshop and barn. I could see 3 grey dappled horses grazing happily in the meadow, and on the horizon the rise and fall of the craggy mountains that were very sculptural. I will admit the views were transfixing, and I was well aware that I was exceedingly lucky to be here. The taxi immediately ground to a halt. My energetic driver jumped out of his truck faster than a March hare, pulling my light suitcase out of the trunk, eagerly opening my car door for me. I climbed out of the back seat, thanking the driver profusely and slipping a generous tip in his hands, of which he was grateful for. He gave me a big toothy grin, showing off a perfect set of white pearly teeth that were even more pronounced and accentuated by his walnut-coloured Middle Eastern skin tone. "Enjoy your holiday in Idaho," he says, giving me a wink. "Eat some of those delicious potatoes out there for me, will you?" he says. I watched the taxi reverse, gliding away down the road, while the taxi driver gave me a congenial hoot with a quick tap of his horn, and soon his truck was all but a dot on the horizon. I stood there still for a brief second, drawing in a deep breath. I absorbed my environment with a thankful reverence. 2 weeks on my own, spent in a fabulous place like this. It was going to be brilliant, better than brilliant, absolutely amazing. I could see the ornate black front door, with a gleaming gold lion knocker, open. A slender woman clad in snugly fitting jeans, wearing a blue sweatshirt, with the loud words, "I love Idaho," splashed magnanimously across the fabric, in white curly letters. She came racing down the steps with her arms outstretched. She was thrilled to see me. I was somewhat taken aback by the effusive, gushing welcome I received. I liked the gregarious, vociferous woman at once. She threw me into her arms. "Brianna, it's so good to see you! How long has it been?" she says, giving me the tightest, unreserved emotional hug. "I think about 5 years ago," I said. "Well, it was at my grandmother's funeral, actually." "That's right, it was, wasn't it? Oh, that was such a terribly sad day, wasn't it? It's been far too long, Brianna, as I keep saying to your mother all the time. My word," she says, stepping back to study me closely. "I do believe you've grown into a very elegant young lady. Actually, you rather remind me a lot of my mother, your late grandmother, in photographs I've seen of her, when she was a young girl. You're the spitting image of her, actually. She had the gorgeous Titian colouring you have, and blue eyes. Now come on in. I want you to meet the rest of the gang, if you can call us that." I noticed Liz looked much younger than my mother, even with such a tiny age difference between the two of them. Maybe the stressful demands of my mother's high-pressure job in the city of Chicago been less than kind on her skin, extracting a capacious toll on her physical appearance, as stress can be regretfully as taxing as the sun itself. It would seem my mother looked yonks older than her sister Liz, whom didn't even have a wrinkle on her fair skin, and wasn't even wearing a stitch of makeup either, which made her appear even younger. I noticed her black hair was pulled away neatly in a ponytail from her face. I couldn't help but reflect that she could easily have fitted in with a group of my girlfriends, and no one would have suspected she was older than any of us. Liz's husband was very reserved, a quiet man, who, although younger than his wife by a couple of years, looked significantly older than she did, with a weathered, bronze, slightly rugged complexion, a prickly, silvery grey stubble that bedecked his chin. He looked every inch the quintessential farmer, wearing a blue plaid shirt, denim jeans, and cowboy boots. A solitary type of man that liked to hang out on his own, I guessed. I perceived he was not fond of meeting strangers, of which clearly he considered I was one. My mother had warned me he was very reticent, self-effacing, and rather evasive. Maybe he was the real reason why our families had never got together at Thanksgiving and Christmas over the years. He looked almost as if family reunions, social niceties, and interactions of the like would naturally be like the quintessential albatross around his neck. "This is my husband Hugh," says Liz. "Hugh, this is my niece Brianna, who's going to look after Ethan for us while we're away. Aren't we lucky to have Ethan being taken care of by such a reliable niece? I keep counting my blessings. We don't have to leave Ethan in the charge of some unreliable, indifferent childminder who's more interested in her cell phone than watching over my son, which is so often the case."
"Absolutely," said Hugh. "This is most kind of you indeed, Brianna, coming all the way from Chicago especially for us. As my wife Liz says, we are exceedingly grateful to you for taking on this job. We would not be comfortable at all going to Italy if our son was not in very good hands and taken well care of. We know we can rely on you to take good care of him."
Hugh did not even reach out to shake my hand in his, but I didn't take any offence, as my mother had warned me that he was painfully shy. The family had 2 friendly French overweight ebullient bulldogs, who came bounding up towards me, and were very affectionate, rolling on their backs, demanding to have their podgy stomachs tickled, of which I was exceedingly happy to oblige, as I adore animals. Their flat noses were too adorable, and they were the kind of dogs that were a pleasure to have around, as they oozed personality.
"Ethan, sweetheart, where are you? Your cousin Brianna's here. She's come all the way from Chicago to see you. Come on, aren't you going to come and say hello?"
The cutest young boy with a dazzling smile emerged. He had brown, short-cropped hair that was punked up in the middle like a hedgehog, with bright blue eyes that twinkled like stars. He came trotting up to me so confidently and gave me the biggest all-embracing hug. Clearly not suffering from his father's bashfulness, that was very clear.
"You never told me that Cousin Brianna was so pretty, Mummy," he said.
Ooh, he was quite the little charmer, I thought to myself, for one so young. When he was older, he was clearly going to break many a heart. That was poignantly obvious.
"Hello, Ethan," I said. "It's good to finally meet you. Mum told me lots about you, but you're much cooler than I ever imagined you'd be." "You too. I've been so excited to meet you, Brianna. I'm glad you're going to look after me. I can show you where they do the best ice creams in town. They're so yummy there, and we can go to the movies together. We're going to have so much fun now that we have the adults out of our hair."
"Well, I'm looking forward to it, Ethan. I really am." It was a day after Liz and Hugh had finally left for Italy that I began to settle down into the farmhouse like a duck to water. It was hard not to enjoy my lackadaisical environment, wallowing in the lap of luxury, surrounded by such breathtaking beauty. It was clear that my aunt's family were wealthy, as their house was fitted with Bang & Olufsen musical centres, luxurious furnishings, and state-of-the-art fixtures and fittings. I was in my element. I enjoyed my nephew's company, who was as bright as a button and fun to be around. At 8 years old, he was unusually clever. My Uncle Hugh had informed me the potatoes were generous crops and easy to manage, but I didn't have to worry about them at all. There would be a local boy visiting that would attend to some of the farming duties, while my uncle and aunt were away for 2 weeks, which included mucking out the stables and feeding the horses daily. So in reality, Eton and I could have a plethora of quality time together without worrying about any of the practicalities of running a farm, apart from slapping some meals together and throwing dirty dishes into the dishwasher, which was about as hard as it got. We rode bicycles and ATVs around the countryside together, along with Silver the horse, down some of the most breathtaking, beautiful horse-riding trails I've ever seen. We visited the town for ice cream and pizza, and we went to the movies and did so much more. It was one hot morning in mid-August when the sunshine filtered through the crack in my bedroom windows, in bright shafts of light. Eton came bounding into my room. I was fast asleep at the time and awoken by him jumping up and down the mattress of my bed like a trampoline.
"Wake up, Brianna! Wake up! Wake up, you sleepyhead!"
he was saying. The 2 French bulldogs were infected by his ebullient effervescence and were jumping up and down against my mattress and yapping loudly. "Eton," I groaned, feeling ever so slightly peeved. "Can't you see I'm trying to sleep? Just give me a wee bit longer, won't you? I'm just very tired this morning."
"I'm up, Brianna. Have you forgotten? You're supposed to be looking after me, not the other way round," he protested cheekily. "If I'm up, then you need to be up too. You're the only lazy bum around here. Everyone else is up. Even our lazy bulldogs are up, which proves that you are very, very lazy."
"All right," I groaned. "I'm getting up, but give me a minute, will you? I'm older than you. It takes me a little longer to get up."
"I know what we should do. Let's go huckleberry picking. There are lots of huckleberries in the woods growing under bushes at this time of the year. My mother always makes yummy sauce to serve with the vanilla ice cream and pancakes using huckleberries. Last year we picked so many. My mother even made jam. She's still got some in the store cupboard if you want to taste it. It's really nice."
"Huckleberries," I said, in a sleepy state. "But are they even ripe at this time of year?"
"Of course! It's August, silly. There's lots in the wood grove and they're sweet. Please, please can't we go?"
"All right, Eton. Let's go huckleberry picking. Go and get a couple of bowls for us to collect some berries with, will you?"
"We don't need bows. We need buckets. We're going to pick lots of berries. You're the best, Brianna. You're the absolute best. The best cousin in the whole world. Thank you so much."
If I had perceived that going picking for huckleberries would end up wrenching the rug from beneath my feet, turning my entire world upside down, so that my clouded, injudicious mind would become as fluffy and irrational as white cotton wool, while all practical common sense and insightful thinking would fleetingly alienate and aggress itself from me, so that I would fail to engage in sound reasoning or logical introspection or the rational maturity of a seasoned adult. I did not fathom for a moment that I would be consumed by a bitter, nauseous, hopeless despair that I'd never tasted before on my tongue, that defiled the sweet taste of the berries we'd been eating earlier on. How could a simple day of berry picking go so badly wrong? I was 20 years old, for goodness sake. This kind of direful horror was not something I would ever consider rearing its ugly head, manifesting itself in my reality. But it did. And the grievous part of it all is I didn't even have the remotest suggestive inkling, or shall we say prognostic hunch, that this day would ultimately, indelibly remain marked on my life forever, like an unsightly tattoo that you have done on an impulsive moment of drunken inebriation that you always regret. I mean, what harm could there be in a humble engagement, picking a plethora of black or purple sweet delicious wild berries in a wood grove, for goodness sake? It was a harmless, innocuous activity, enjoyed by so many at this time of year. Besides, the idea of berry picking held rather great appeal for me. Maybe I'd try my hand at experimenting with some jam making and adding my collection of jams to proudly join my aunt's in her pantry, like new sweet-tasting recruits joining an army battalion. So there we were, Me and Eton, jubilantly skipping along like brother and sister, without a care in the world, with a bucket and pail in our hands, you could say. Indeed, it seemed as if the wide age gap between us had dissipated like the white smoke of a chimney, as if I'd backtracked in time, becoming 8 years old all over again. I certainly felt like it, as if all the cares of the world, like my studying back at home in Chicago, were no longer relevant, or even remotely connected with my life right now, and had fleetingly been extinguished from my mind. I was obliviously unaware of what was soon to unfold on this seemingly benign day, with two ebullient French bulldogs waddling close behind us, as they were on the portly side, as they could have done with possibly losing a couple of pounds, if I'm being brutally honest. But Aunt Liz admitted she couldn't help spoiling the two of them, and gave them broiled chicken regularly. They are part of my extended family, she told me. I don't see them as just dogs. They're family members. So there we were, ready for our marvellously enterprising berry-picking adventure, faithfully armed with 2 large buckets in our hands, which I clandestinely thought were a little optimistic for berry-picking, but Eton insisted they were perfect. And what did I know? I'd never picked huckleberries before a day in my life. We walked energetically through the long knee-high grass of the meadow, dappled with bright yellow wildflowers, towards the large, sprawling, eclectic clusters of trees that I noticed were a congenial mix of Douglas firs, white pines, Engelmann spruces, Pacific yews, red cedars, hemlocks and larches. It was a hot day, the radiant shafts of white sun magnanimous in the warmth that had suppurated over our shoulders and necks, like a moist, warm sauna, as there was a rising, unpleasant humidity in the air that was progressively advancing in its intensity, so seeking light relief in the woodgrove seemed like a promising idea. Ostensibly, if you percolated in the sun for long enough, you could potentially get badly burnt in weather like this, and I knew it was unusual for Idaho to be this humid in August, but the moist heat was audacious, and even behind my neck I was beginning to sweat. Relief greeted us like an affectionate friend as we entered the woodgrove. The significantly cooler, refreshing temperatures were like thoroughly enjoying a fortifying ice-cold shower. Much of the sunlight was vanquished from this shaded sanctuary, so gentle infusions of light peppered the forest floor, inaugurating some ethereal, subtle qualities that effectuated the vegetation to glimmer with a silvery sheen. Better still, a whipping, invigorating wind fanned and swept through the forest charismatically, compelling the needled boughs of the trees to awaken from their sleepy slumber, and jiggle as if hundreds of hands were waving at us. But this energizing breeze nuzzled our cheeks, blew our hair back, ventilated the entire woodgrove, and hyped up our energy levels so that, like wilting flowers in the meadow, due to the heat, our flagging spirits were revived, our enthusiasm enervated.
See, I told you it would be cool in here. Not just the temperature, but the forest. It's amazing, isn't it?
He wasn't wrong. This viridescent, resplendent forest consummated my attention, with its transfixing, bedazzling beauty, its verdant splendour that furnished the forest in green, corrugating, hanging, resplendent drapes of moss and foliage. There were smaller trees, vines, shrubs, so many heavily bedecked with black berries growing under the trees, along with beguiling wildflowers, sedges, mosses, lichens and fungi, the latter growing industriously, by clutching, clinging and attaching themselves to fallen tree trunks that lie loosely across the dark, rich, fertile floor, along with a confetti of loose leaves, twigs and needles, which create a rich mulch, so that the earth beneath our feet was softly cushioned, so when we walked along the trails, it felt as if our feet were almost buoyant. Needless to say, the 2 French bulldogs, Tweedle and Twerk, were so excited in the woods, smelling everything, lifting up their legs on every available plant surface, as if to leave a marked signature behind or autographed for any other woodland animals to acknowledge.
Look at these buttes, said Eden. Do you know the Aussies call everything buttes? And I like the word so much. I use it all the time. So does my mother. It's what you say when referring to a bunch of something. Look at these buttes.
They are buttes, I say. And you're right. It's an excellent word to use. Maybe it'll become an American slang word one day. I pop some berries in my mouth. Oh, my word! These taste so good. I now know the juices are spilling down the sides of my mouth, but I don't care. It's part of the privilege of berry picking, isn't it? Being stained with all this berry juice and enjoying the fruit al fresco. It doesn't get better than this, and dripping with juice, it's all part of the experience of berry picking. Look at us, I giggle. We're eating so many berries. Nothing is ending up in our buckets. At this rate, there'll be no huckleberry sauce on our vanilla ice cream. Listen, says Ethan suddenly. Shh! I don't hear anything, I say, popping some more berries into my mouth. That's my point. Don't you get it? The bird song is gone. Don't you know anything about woods? Everything's quiet. It's not normally like this. Don't you feel as if something's watching us? Not really, I say in a nonchalant way. But you're right. The forest is unnaturally quiet. Go on, I say. Let's pick some more berries. And don't eat any more. Look, you're covered in red juice. Good job your mum's not here to see us. She'd say I was a bad influence on you. My bladder stung with fullness. I told little Ethan to stay exactly where he was, that I wouldn't be a minute, and that was all it took. A swift moment of distraction, upon which I took a brief second to relieve myself behind a tree, and when I dutifully returned, Ethan was nowhere to be found. But the two French bulldogs, Tweedle and Twerk, whom had been running around the woodgrove rambunctiously only moments before, looked as if they'd been startled by something, as they became somewhat subdued, and were sitting with their ears pointed forward. It was rather conspicuous to me that they'd seen something, but what, I couldn't imagine. This couldn't be happening to me, could it? Of course, Ethan had decided to relieve himself as well. That is what it was. Ethan! Ethan! Ethan, where are you? The forest remained airily still. Even the stillness had a pronounced, ominous sound to it. Soon the stillness is evacuated. The woodland sanctuary becomes alive again, serenaded by the pretty chirrups and tweets of the birds, upon whose joyful song I barely even notice. Panic rises up in my body, like the angry, churning waves of a tempestuous sea that cannot be calmed or stilled. My head turns to the left and to the right, to the left and right again and again. My body moves frantically around the forest, zigzagging and whizzing through the trees, to and fro, like a remote-powered clockwork engine, burning on full capacity. I'm looking under every shrub, every leafy fern, every available piece of turf, up every tree, to find my cousin, but he's nowhere to be found. It's as if he's disappeared off the face of the earth. Has he been abducted, stalked, attacked, and, God forbid, even eaten by a wild animal? Please, God, no. This can't be happening to me. Eaton is playing a macabre joke on me. That's what it is. He's got a wicked sense of humour. This is what this is all about. Any minute now he's going to come bounding out of the trees, saying boo, and when he does so, I'm going to kill him for scaring me half to death like this. But time passes. It folds away, like the sheets being rolled back at the end of a bed. The only word strumming into my head right now is, you need to find him. You need to find him. You need to find him. I don't know how long I search for little Eaton, calling his name hysterically, but truly time has lost its grasp on reality, slipped away so seamlessly, faded into a hazy oblivion. Even the two French bulldogs have become tired and wary. They've fallen asleep by the empty berry buckets, waiting for this frantic, hyperactive bee to calm down. They eye me with a resigned, apathetic indifference. In a trice the forest darkens. The white fluffy clouds that I observed earlier through the trees become mottled and grey. The orange-gold sun sets over the valley, until she slips away behind the clouds. My heart sinks with her. I feel so heavy inside myself, as if I'm filled with cement. I walk away from the forest like a flagging flower in the meadow that has lost all its lustre after a cruel hot day upon which the life has been suctioned out of me. Of course, I knew exactly what I should do. I'm not going to pretend any different, but I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't. A little faint voice in the back of my head was whispering, "Call the police. Call the police." call the police, but I just couldn't do it. That would be admitting defeat. That I'd masterfully failed in my responsibilities in taking charge over my cousin. It would be acknowledging the raw horror of this dreadful reality and the acquiesce understanding that things will never, ever be the same again. I knew when you called the police it was usually irreversible, so final, a bleak outcome. I'm sorry, but that is my honest opinion. Perhaps I'd seen way too many movies, I don't know, saturated with such sadness and grim outlooks. I had formidable visions of policemen knocking at my aunt's door, handing her a blood-soaked T-shirt belonging to Eton. I could see my aunt's mortified reaction as she buried her despairing dark locks of hair into Eton's shirt, clinging on to the smell of her son, weeping into the folds of the fabric. I could picture her face. It was too unbearable to even consider. I could hear her saying in my head, "Brianna, we trusted you to take care of Eton. We trusted you. What have you done?" How would I ever be able to face my aunt again? I could never expect her to forgive me, could I? I couldn't forgive her if the shoe was on the other foot. I could envisage our family becoming estranged and alienated over this cruel eventuality and ill-omened twist of fate. The gulf between my mother and her sister would become as wide as the Gulf of Mexico, the largest gulf in the entire world. I retreated into the house, exhausted, my body defeated, drained, physically spent, completely washed out. I quickly laid down some food for the two hungry bulldogs because I had no appetite whatsoever. I'll lie down on the bed for just a couple of minutes, I told myself. Just a couple of minutes. Get a brief little bit of shut-eye, and then I will resume my search during the night. That never happened. I woke up the following morning at 8 o'clock with a start. The bright light of the early morning flooded generously through the windows, as the curtains were not closed. The events of the previous day were foggy in my head. For a brief second I thought Eton's disappearance had all been but a lucid dream. I mean, that hadn't really happened, had it? Then reality held me to ransom when my cell phone rang, with my aunt's voice on the other end. The bodeful events of the previous day came flooding back to me, like icy water being sprayed on me by a water pistol, giving me that sudden jolt of reality. "Hello, Aunt Liz. How are you?" I say, my voice failing to betray the despondency I actually feel. "Hello, sweetheart. Oh, I hope I haven't got you up too early, have I? You sound a little, well, what's the word? Rather subdued. I hope my son isn't wearing you into a frazzle. Or have I just woken you up at this inopportune time? I sincerely hope not. I think we're supposed to be 8 hours ahead of you here in Italy. It's late afternoon here. I thought I'd phone you up to check how you and Eton are getting along." My heart almost leaps into my throat. Actually, we're having lots of fun here, but like you said, well, we've been sleeping. That's why I might sound a bit, sort of out of sorts, but nothing to do with Eton, of course. Glad to hear it, sweetheart. Can I speak to him? I'd love to hear his voice. I miss him so much. It's that hazard of being a mother. You always need to connect with your kid all the time. I'd rather you didn't, Liz. I hope you don't mind. It's just he's exhausted after picking berries yesterday. And like you said, it's very early here. Very early. In fact, it's still very, very dark outside. Very dark. I can hear him snoring. Quite loudly, actually. He's fast asleep. It wouldn't be fair to wake him up. "You say Eton's snoring? You're being serious?" I hear her saying to Hugh. "Eton's snoring, can you believe it? I think he's becoming more like you, Hugh. Really, you do surprise me, Brianna. So it's earlier where you are, much earlier than I suspected. I'm sorry. It's terribly rude of me to phone you this early, but my calculations... I thought it was 8 o'clock where you are, but I've obviously got it horribly wrong. I do apologise. I suspect different parts of Italy are different time zones. I'm so sorry to wake you up this early."
Well, yeah, it's very dark here. Very dark. And Ethan, he's fast asleep. As I said, he's snoring a lot. I don't think it's good to wake him up in the circumstances. Never you mind, sweetheart. You're obviously showing him a very good time. Thanks for all you're doing, Brianna. I'm ever so grateful. I honestly don't know what we would do without you. But I can see I've got you at a bad time. You do sound rather exhausted. I'll phone you tomorrow early evening. Our time, I suspect. But it'll be morning for you. And hopefully by then Ethan will be wide awake. Tell him I send him loads and loads of love, and I just can't wait to see him. Lots and lots of kisses to both of you. Mwah, 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 mwah. My heart deflates like a punctured balloon. I hope to God they don't find that I'm lying about the time difference and that they smell a rat. What if they know I'm lying? All I want to do is to go back to my bed, burrow into my pillow, pull the duvet over my head, and pretend that this nightmare is just not happening to me, but to somebody else, not me. I simply have to find my cousin. But where on earth is he? There's no way I can call the police, not until I've exhausted all the other options. I just have to find Ethan. Where could he be? I leave the French bulldogs in the house with big portions of breakfast to keep them busy, and close the front door behind me. I run through the meadow. The grass is blowing backwards and forwards, swaying briskly in a cool wind. The cheerful, lingering sunshine is bright. I enter the woods and call Ethan's name. But this time tears are streaking down my cheeks, as a hopelessness seems to settle over me, as if slowly and surely I'm coming to the dawning realization that all hope is lost, and that this nightmare is not going to go away, that it's real. I can't live in denial any more, can I? As I enter the woods for a brief moment, the beguiling beauty of the serene, verdant sanctuary bewitches me so much that for a second my worries are eclipsed, until I remember exactly why I'm here. I move towards the buckets which I'd left in the forest last night. I'm surprised to discover they're full to the brim with berries. In a trice, a fleeting hope bounds through me. Can I dare to hope that Ethan gathered all these berries? But then where is he? All of a sudden I feel something hitting my back. It's a pebble. Ethan! Ethan, is that you? Ethan! That's when I see her. She's indicating for me to follow her. But what is she? I remember a long while ago watching a programme on television about an idiosyncratic, ambiguous creature that may just roam the forests of North America. But never for a single moment had I believed or even entertained the thought that people's random accounts were even remotely true. I was a Chicago girl after all. We didn't believe in incongruous eccentricities like this. Yet this creature was not a trick of the light, nor a faint impression of an overactive imagination, but she was real as you or me. The creature, I am certain, is a Bigfoot. I mean, what else could she possibly be? She's easily over 8 foot tall, with a matriarch-like energy. She's all female, with large pillowy breasts. Her muscular, robust body is so firm and toned. It's as if the only fat cells in her entire body have congregated and isolated themselves to her breast tissue, abandoning the rest of her body. Her silhouette is shaped like a human being. Her arms are much longer than ours are, though, while her head is a distinctive pyramid shape, with a short, stocky neck that is barely visible, but sweeps into the shoulders in a seamless curl. Her body is covered in dark brown curtains of long silky hair, with red highlights that can only be discerned when the sunlight catches the shafts. The face she possesses is rather feminine, with high cheekbones and an oval chin. She has deep-set eyes that are a golden-brown colour, that seem so congenial and warm. I should be afraid. I mean, this creature is huge, very intimidating, lofty, majestic, solid and stoic, like a redwood tree. Suffice to say, even a 6-foot man with a large build would feel small in her intimidating, rather daunting presence. But fear does not entertain my thoughts, not even for a brief second. Indeed, I am so mesmerised and captivated that for a brief moment all thoughts of my missing cousin have floated away into the ether like a kite on the wind.
I don't hesitate to follow this Bigfoot, rather like a honeybee following a trail of nectar. I'm intrigued and inquisitive about this Bigfoot. She's indicating for me to be very quiet, and that's when I see Ethan high up on a very tall oak tree, next to another hairy-looking creature that I think must be the female Bigfoot's youngling, clearly a boy. It's Ethan! He's safe! He's all right! Ethan is all right! My heart bounces with delight. The emptiness inside me fills with relief. I call out to him, "Ethan! Ethan!" For a moment he barely acknowledges me, and then his face breaks out into the broadest grin I've ever seen.
Look at me, Auntie Brianna. I'm on top of the world. I'm on top of the world. Who would ever believe I could climb such a tall tree?
I can see that, Ethan. Come down right now. I don't want you messing around a moment longer. Get down now, Ethan. The Bigfoot female seems delighted with Ethan's interaction with her son. I think she's expecting me to feel exactly the same way. I certainly might have done if Ethan hadn't gone missing for a whole day and night. So I'm not quite so enamoured by their friendship. I think the Bigfoot female senses my misgivings and is a wee bit disappointed in the circumstances. I think she was hoping I would share in her enthusiasm about their newfound friendship. When I watch Ethan and this little Bigfoot playing together so happily, you'd never believe for a single moment they were remotely aware of their differences. They're incredibly comfortable together.
I better go. As you can see, my cousin's in a big huff,
says Ethan to his friend, tapping him on the shoulder and climbing down the tree cautiously. I watch his friend nod at him, as if he understands exactly what Ethan has told him.
I always wanted to climb that tree, Brianna, said Ethan, climbing down with the Bigfoot female giving him a final helping hand, so his little feet land smoothly on the earthen floor. Moti showed me how to climb the tree. Did you see we gathered you some berries in the buckets?
I did see, thank you. I didn't know whether to be completely annoyed with Ethan for his nonchalant attitude or to just squeeze the life out of him with the hugest, most welcoming hug, as there is no doubt I was overjoyed to see him. I nodded thankfully at the female Bigfoot. She watches me as I usher Ethan out of the forest. I think she looks disappointed that we're leaving.
What about the berries we collected? We picked them this morning. Aren't you going to get them?
Forget the berries. Young man, you have some explaining to do. What the hell happened to you yesterday? I went for a pee. I told you to stay exactly where you were, and when I came back, you were gone. I was so frantic, I was searching for you everywhere. I was calling your name, but you never answered me. I've never been so scared in my entire life. I didn't know where you were. You can't imagine what I was going through. But did you give a toss about that? Did you? No, you didn't, obviously not. I don't understand it. You're a clever, considerate boy, Ethan. I don't know what possessed you to behave with such contemptuous disregard.
I'm sorry. I got caught up in the moment when I saw the young hairy boy. He was so nice. He took me to their cave. I spent the whole night with their family. This morning when it was still dark, we gathered berries for you. I thought you'd be really pleased about that. I didn't know you would be angry. We were only having fun.
Ethan, I want you to know something. I came this close, and I mean this close, to calling the police last night, I say, making a circular gesture with my fingers. I was so frightened, Ethan, you have no idea. But I was scared to call the police. I thought something dreadful had happened to you. Your mother phoned this morning. I lied to her. I pretended you were fast asleep in the bedroom and snoring loudly. She wanted to speak to you.
You told her I was snoring? I don't snore.
Well, you do now. Didn't it occur to you for a moment that I'd be worried about you?
Not really. Have you ever read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe?
Yes, I did a long time ago, but what has that got to do with anything, Ethan?
Don't you see, it's got everything to do with what happened to me. Lucy enters the land called Narnia under the rule of the White Witch for over 100 years, and she encounters Mr. Thomas the Fawn and then the beavers. Well, yesterday it was the same for me. I felt like I entered another world, meeting the strange hairy creatures that were friendly to me, just like the nice beavers in Narnia in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. I thought when I finished playing with my friends, no time would have lapsed, as when Lucy got out of the wardrobe, it was like she'd never been away. I thought when I returned to the berries, you would have just finished your pee. But you won't be able to believe the buckets were full of berries. I never knew the time I spent with the creatures would be the same as time here. Even my mum says the time is different in Italy. Yes, the time is different in Italy to here, but the time in the forest is always the same, even if you meet fairies, goblins or Bigfoots. That is weird, though. You rarely believe that you thought you'd entered another world, like at the back of the wardrobe, because you encountered hairy beings. That's exactly what I thought. I'm sorry, Brianna. If I'd known the time was different, I would have come back sooner. All right. I think I get it. Years later, I asked my cousin if he'd ever played with his Bigfoot friend in the woods again. He said that the Bigfoot female had told her son that she didn't want him upsetting the nice lady she'd met in the woodgrove, which was why he couldn't play with my cousin anymore. I realised then that the Bigfoot mother had read my mind and comprehended that I was upset about Eaton's interaction with her son. But more mind-blowing than anything else was Eaton had engaged in telepathic communication with the young Bigfoot. I'm glad to say that after my aunt returned from Italy, it was like the floodgates were opened in our family, as we regularly spent Christmases and, of course, Thanksgiving in Idaho with the entire family, like regular American families. But I regret to say I never saw the Bigfoot female again. But I know that I shall never forget her beautiful energy, and the fact that she cared so much that she upset me still warms my heart today. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I'd heard about people being kidnapped before, even passed personal commentary about such things in nonchalant conversations myself with friends of mine, as we all pondered what on earth could have happened to so many Americans out there that disappear from their lives, never to be seen or heard from again. Of course, I was naturally curious about how it was possible that over 600,000 people could go missing in North America every year. But never, never for a fleeting moment did I suspect that one day I might potentially become a missing person myself, that could so easily have ended up being a statistic if I hadn't received intervention from an unlikely, ambiguous source that came to my rescue on a day when things had gone so badly sour, and when my life could fortuitously have been demanded from me if I hadn't played my hand of cards with a savvy discernment and steely grit that refused to allow my emotional turmoil to swallow up my common sense. On soulful reflection, I'm proficiently aware when the hands of fate were smiling down upon me after an insufferable, callous, heavy-handed day when the world had certainly not been my friend. It was one of those cheerless, noxious, sombre days when I would have served my very best interests so much better if I'd simply covered my head and burrowed into my snug duvet, hibernating and recouping in bed, recovering from the banging impedance of an intolerable migraine headache that drilled into my head like a woodpecker's beak, holding me to ransom, transmitting the first warning nudges that this day would not end up auspiciously. But did I listen? Of course not. I never listened to my gut. I always chose to conquer those stirring, jilting feelings with a deep measure of indifference. After all, I wasn't superstitious. I did not believe in such irrational jargon, which were the ramblings of a chatty mind. That's all it was. Yet despite the invisible internal tugs, the ugly encroaching interferences, the trespassing intrusions, the obtrusive meddling phone calls from demanding customers, all the rotten fruit of what I describe as an uncongenial, unproductive day, I still made it through that dreadful day. How I did, I honestly don't know. But then I'm made of sturdy stuff, and it'll take more than a cyclone to drag me down.
It would seem somewhere in the distant ether, the hand of God had heard my desperate cries for help, and was quick to send me angelic reinforcements that I would never have believed possible, unless I'd witnessed them for myself, leading me to believe that this world is a whole lot more remarkable than we can ever begin to fathom. The day my life was serendipitously going to change was like any other normal day of the week, as it was for the people that got ensnared in the 9/11 disaster, and of course other catastrophic calamities around the world, that invariably spring up like a spring flower in the meadow, on what initially on the surface may seemingly appear to be a very benevolent, benign day. Only on this occasion, for me personally, I woke up in the morning with a pounding migraine headache. Was the universe giving me a subtle nudge, advising me not to go into work? Most likely this was indeed the case. I should have listened, but I didn't. Even my own husband, Eric, sagaciously advised me to phone into work ill. I could hardly expect an inexperienced junior to man the fort at the estate agent's offices in town without my intervention and judicious help, could I? "You look as white as a sheet, sweetheart," my husband informed me. "You know what you're like when you get a migraine. You barely function. I'm sure Amanda can manage the offices alone." "It's not that simple," I explained. "The other 2 members of staff are on leave. Amanda is pretty new to the business. I can't leave her to her own devices. She's like a fish out of water with a lot to learn. She's a rookie. She's only been with us for 4 months. She's young, callow and inexperienced." "I don't think you're giving the young girl enough credit. In my accountancy firm, I've learned to delegate a lot. It's one of the greatest secrets to success in my business, to give your employees more responsibilities. You'll be pleasantly surprised, I think, how competent people can be when needs must. You should give Amanda her moment to shine. You might find she actually surprises you." "You're possibly right, Eric. You usually are. But I'd prefer not to test the water and take some unnecessary chances. There's lots of work that needs doing back at the office. I haven't got the benefit of choice. I've got to go in. We have a lot more properties on our listings at the moment, so it's incredibly busy. Amanda doesn't have any adroit experience or proficient skill in showing people around properties, which is another thing I have to teach her." My husband rolls his eyes. "Oh, come on, sweetheart. How hard can it possibly be showing someone around a house? Anybody can do it. I'm sure I can do it." "Don't be so dismissive, Eric. You make it seem as if any old codger on the street corner can do my job, which I find rather insulting. It's not as straightforward as it actually sounds. Believe it or not, when I show people around a property, I do have to try and sell the place, open their eyes to the embryonic potential of the property. You'll be surprised how many people's eyes are shut. They don't see the budding inherent possibilities in a property. They'll say things like, "Oh, I can't buy this house. The main bedroom isn't big enough for me and my husband." I have to show them the house's alluring promise, don't I? The hidden prospects. I have to show them that actually the capacity is big enough if they just knock through the spare room or something, and then they suddenly seriously consider buying the property, as they see it through new eyes, with a little helping hand from moi. I say that with a slight cocky arrogance to my voice that wasn't intended and came off rather badly. "Please," says my husband, "I don't care if you're the best salesperson in the entire universe, sweetheart. There's no way on God's earth you're going to successfully sell me a property that I have no interest in buying." I don't want to argue with you, but believe me, there's a lot more to selling a house than you think, Eric, and there's a ton of admin work to do as well. Amanda is new to this game, but today we shan't be showing properties to clients until the others get back. Thank goodness for that. "I'm not going to argue with you, sweetheart. Not when you're in a feisty, argumentative mood like this. But I still think you shouldn't go into work." He kisses me affectionately on the cheek. "Quinn, I hate to say this, but you do burn the candle at both ends. You work far too hard, in my humble opinion. You need to learn to relax sometimes. You should give Amanda a chance to show you what she's made of. I'm sure you could get her to run your offices like a dream, if you just gave her a favourable opportunity. I really wish you would.
And leave her to her own devices, Eric. No, I'm sorry, that's just not going to happen. I certainly wouldn't have appreciated being thrown into the deep end when I first began working as an estate agent. That's just not fair. You don't do things like that. Despite my protestations, the idea of going to work was about as attractive to me as slamming my truck through a brick wall. Regretfully, my head was throbbing so badly, I was almost seeing stars. I could taste the nausea welling up in the back of my throat that always accompanied every migraine headache I ever had. I shuffled around awkwardly in my bedside drawer, on the hunt for my elusive migraine tablets that always had a masterful habit of disappearing just when I needed them the most. I sighed with relief when I found the svelte bag tucked neatly in a book I was reading. For me, these pills were like gold dust. I probably felt like a drug addict right now, shaking with eager anticipation to get my new high. I knew all my hope lay in the effectiveness of these tablets. They better work. My day was riding precariously on their efficiency. I tossed the 5 pills in the back of my throat, washing them down with water. These pills were made up for me especially by a pharmacist for migraines. They contained anti-nausea in the collection. To date, they were the only pills that seemed to bring my migraine headaches into submission, while nothing else had ever worked for me. Believe me, I know. I had tried everything. As I expected, within 30 minutes I was seeing light at the end of the tunnel. The headache had shifted. The vacillating waves of nausea were finally ebbing away. I sighed with a thankful gratitude, grudgingly ambling over to my wardrobe, opening the door and deciding what to wear. With the enthusiasm of a walrus on a bad hair day, I groaned. I hated making decisions about what clothes to wear, especially when I just needed to get out of the house very quickly. I was always expected to be smart in my job, so looking good literally went with the territory and was an unspoken assumption. I was often required to show potential buyers around various properties. I decided I would wear a very classic pantsuit with practical flat shoes. I hurriedly put my legs into a tailored pair of black trousers, which tapered down to flattering bell bottoms, and always gave me a svelte appearance, along with a crisp white cotton shirt and a long black jacket. This was the safe option for me, that I would grab out of the wardrobe when I didn't want to think about what to wear. It became like a standard uniform that I could rely on when everything else failed. My hair looks like a right mess this morning, as if a couple of vultures had been laying their eggs in my hair. My hazelnut mane has become static and electric, flying on end. I apply some anti-static serum through my long hair and brush it. It looks sleek and shining, thankfully. I suppose I should be grateful for small mercies, however small they may be. I pull it back from my face into a ponytail and wince with horror when I glance at my abysmal reflection in the mirror. I'm mortified. I look like a zombie or a ghost. My husband is right. I'm as white as a sheet, and there are black circles under my puffy green eyes that suggest that perhaps last night I didn't have a good night's sleep after all. Worse still, there's a bright pink pimple the size of Mount Helen that has erupted on my chin overnight, and is not yet at that satisfying stage when I can squeeze out all the pus. I apply a dab of pimple cream to the offensive bump, and then with a touch of foundation called Peach Spice by Lancome, I smother much-needed colour over my face, along with a touch of pink lipstick to my lips, Pink Mist by Yves Saint Laurent. I thank God I look halfway human. That ghostly look has finally gone. I glance briefly at my digital clock. I'm running late. I'm the one expected to open up the estate agency this morning. That poor, long-suffering, uncomplaining girl. I imagine poor Amanda is waiting for me outside the agency right now. I'm flooded with prisms of guilt, so I quickly dash to my car, hightailing it to town as fast as I possibly can. Why is it whenever you're in a mad rush, there's always a hold-up in the traffic? One woman has rear-ended a truck. The car and the truck are taking up the major lanes that are needed for the traffic to flow smoothly. They are firmly set in an unfortunate 3 o'clock position in the road. Why? Why does this have to happen this morning?
Why is it when it rains it bloody pours? Excuse the language, but restraining my tongue this morning is not easy. Not when I'm worked up into a frenzied lather, like well-beaten egg whites whipped up into a glossy white snow. The police have slowed down the traffic to a painful gridlock. This is all I need. One policeman is waving his hands to completely stop the traffic, which causes a series of disgruntled hoots from aggrieved drivers, whom, like me, are very anxious to get to work. At long last, the policeman indicates that the traffic can resume to normal. All the cars move in a steady flow. I put my foot on the accelerator, hasten my speed. Finally, I'm pulling into the underground parking lot. I open my car door, slam it behind me, dash to the lift, earnestly pressing the button to the ground floor. And once the lift swings open, I dash to the agency at breakneck speed. I mean, who needs a gym with a frisky workout like this every morning? Amanda is exceedingly polite. She's soft-spoken, self-effacing, a young southern girl. She's about 24 years old. She's one of those sweet, graciously kind people that would never dare offend you by demanding why you're late, or making any snide, underhanded comments. Indeed, I doubt Amanda has ever recruited a swear word in her vocabulary a single day in her life. Suffice to say, much as I'd anticipated, the even-tempered, stoical Amanda is waiting patiently outside the estate agent's with 2 caramel frappuccinos in her hands, one for me and one for her. She hands me my Starbucks cup and gives me a bright, friendly smile. "I thought you might like caramel frappuccino, Mrs. Jensen." "That's very kind of you, Amanda," I say. "That's exactly what I need." She smiles politely as I open up the offices and retrieve the portable cup from her. "I think you've got something attached to your shirt," she says, looking a little uncomfortable, as if she's pointing out a piece of spinach to me on my teeth. I squirm with embarrassment as I roll down my nightdress that is gathered up around my middle and is hanging around my waist like a thick flowery wedge of material that is a little like a coiled belt around my middle. I hadn't even noticed that I'd left on my nightdress while I was getting dressed. How embarrassing! I step out of my nightdress, it hits the floor. Amanda smiles at me and acts as if arriving to work with your nightdress precariously hanging around your middle like your grandmother's old curtains is perfectly normal. Didn't I say she was a nice girl? "How are you, Miss Jensen?" she asks me, not bothering to even mention that I've kept her waiting for well over an hour. If indeed it was one of my 2 other work colleagues that work with me in the estate agents, they would be jumping down my throat by now, screaming blue murder at me. But not Amanda. "I'm fine," I say, smiling at her politely. "I had a bad headache this morning, but it's now under control, I'm glad to say. Do you mind manning the phones, Amanda, while I get some admin done?" "Not at all," she says, smiling at me brightly. In seconds after entering the office, the phone is ringing off the hook. It's so typical. Our 2 other staff members are off on leave. The entire office is a hive of buzzing activity, with only me and Amanda manning the fort. I assure you, if all 4 of us were in the offices today, everything would be calm and serene. The day would sail away smoothly, like 2 poised sailboats with large white sails bobbing away happily on a turquoise blue ocean, without a care in the world. But all hell breaks loose when half the staff are away like this, like angry cats with outstretched paws exposing sharp-pointed talons that are eager to rip your skin to shreds. You can cut the tension in the office with a knife. Even Amanda looks a little on edge today. Our office has turned into a tumultuous ship on the high seas, being exposed to all manner of whipping gale-force winds and stormy, atrocious conditions. To make matters worse, I've had to deal with a couple of rather difficult, punishing clients, which means the day is beginning to become like that annoying, lamentable toothache that won't stop throbbing and is hell-bent on giving you a hard time. In truth, it's one of those convoluted, paradoxical days, which I wish was over before it even started. Even though my headache is gone, I'm seriously fantasizing about the Egyptian cotton sheets that are gracing my bed at home, awaiting to receive my fatigued body. A nice hot cup of chocolate and an evening spent watching YouTube videos. But all this confounding chaos in the office, I could almost certainly well do without.
"There's a lady on the phone," says Amanda, looking at me anxiously. "She's really mad.
I think she's insistent on talking to you. I take the phone from Amanda's outstretched arm and answer it. Mrs. Jensen speaking. How can I help you? Thank God I finally got you, Mrs. Jensen. I put my house on the market at the price I stipulated. I don't know why the hell you bloody phoned me with a lower offer yesterday. I told you I'm only prepared to accept the asking price. Nothing less. What on earth is wrong with you people? Do you have marshmallows for brains? I thought I'd found a decent estate agents when I met you, Mrs. Jensen, but I'm beginning to think the lot of you are completely harebrained. What's wrong with people these days? Why don't they ever listen? Look, Mrs. Davis, I do apologise for all that. I do understand exactly where you're coming from. Believe me, I do. But I only phoned you with the offer, as that's what we're expected to do. I did inform the client that you weren't prepared to accept less than the asking price, but she was insistent that I passed on her lower offer to you. I didn't have a choice in the matter. What poppycock, Mrs. Jensen? I don't buy that for a moment. Of course you had a choice in the matter. And if that client of yours thinks that I'm going to reduce my asking price by $50,000, I don't know what he's smoking. You can tell him that he can put his miserable offer where the sun don't shine, because I would rather eat my dog's canned dinner than accept a meagre offer like that. It's an insult, that's what it is. If that phone call wasn't bad enough, there was another. The office was on fire today, and if you had told me that Mercury was in retrograde, I would have definitely believed you. Mrs. Jensen speaking. How can I help you? Mrs. Jensen, I have to inform you that a very expensive Ming china vase of mine went missing on the show day we had over the weekend. Now I'd like to know what the hell you're going to do about it. I'm sorry, ma'am. I think you should file a police report about it. It's the only advice I can give you. We do warn our clients to lock away their valuables. Are you kidding me? No one told me to lock away my valuables. You're making it up as you're going along, Mrs. Jensen, just so you don't have to accept responsibility for the missing vase. It's so typical of you people, always trying to dodge the bullet. I'm really sorry about your vase, Miss Dean. I really am. I wasn't present at your house showing, but these things do happen. I rarely suggest you file a police report. Someone stole my bloody Ming vase. Don't you get it? I hold you people entirely responsible. You were the one showing my house to the public. You should be able to recoup the cost of my missing vase. Look, I'll talk to my manager for you, Miss Dean, when he gets back from his holiday, and I'll be in touch. As you can imagine, I wanted to tear my hair out. I was so frustrated. This was one of those god-awful days when everything you touch goes wrong. But I had no comprehension. Things were going to get 1,000 times worse, if that was at all possible. It all began when a slender man of about 6'3" walked into our office. As he moved, I noticed one of his legs had a slight hobble to it, but he walked with a sartorial elegance, with his back straight and tall. He took me off guard, as everything about him suggested he possessed a pronounced wealth and prosperity that was so in your face. So much more so than some of my affluent customers who wore their prosperity with a more modest reticence. But everything about this man gave you the impression that he was someone of significant importance and wealth. I could see Amanda glancing up at the man a couple of times. I noticed his pointed black patent boots were so shiny, I would have been surprised if you couldn't see your reflection in them. I had never seen this mysterious, lofty man before, but his clothes were impressively impeccable, as if he'd stepped directly out of a tailor's, as his pinstripe suit fitted like a glove. His smart burgundy and blue striped shirt, with its starched white collar and matching cuffs, was debonairly cuffed with expensive gold and black onyx cufflinks. He was also wearing an ostentatious pair of Calvin Klein glasses. At first I couldn't see his eyes clearly. They were masterfully concealed behind his dark shades. But his straw-coloured hair was not as groomed as his outfit, as it hung long and limp like a surfer's just above his shoulders, giving him a hipster-like appearance, complemented by a matching goatee that fully disguised the shape of what I think might have been a pointed chin. "Hello," I said, raising myself up from my seated position behind my swivel chair, and moving towards the gentleman, with my hand outstretched. He grabbed my hand, squeezing it extra tight, causing me almost to wince out in pain internally. I snatched my hand away, thinking, bloody hell, that really hurt. But I maintained a stiff, warm smile. I'd like to see the property for sale in Bridge Street, if I may. The old Victorian mansion. It's a little out of the way. I'm afraid I can't help you today. There's only 2 of us in the offices here. My colleagues are away, but next week I can give you a viewing of the house. I'm sorry, we're just a bit snowed under. It's been busy in the offices today. I'm a serious buyer. Is this how you treat serious buyers like me? I'm only in Seattle for the day. I'm flying back to Chicago this evening, catching the 4-hour flight back home. If I don't see that house, I won't be in a position to buy it. How can I buy something I can't see?
Well, sir, it is available to view online. You can see it that way very clearly.
That's not good enough for me, ma'am. I've seen houses online. They look very different in real life, I'm inclined to find. Very different indeed.
It's all right, Miss Jensen. Take him to see the property. I don't mind. I'll be all right manning the fort here, Amanda pipes. My husband's words come into my head.
Give Amanda her chance to shine.
I feel distinctly uncomfortable about this. She's only been in our employ for over 4 months. She's got so much to learn. How can I leave her in the offices all on her own? It's nearly the end of the day. I'd have to leave her to lock up the place. Please, Miss Jensen, please go. I'll lock up the place. Bring the keys to work tomorrow. I promise. You show the client the house. Sorry, sir, I didn't get your name.
I'm Steve Harvey, he tells us.
Please, Miss Jensen, you take Mr. Harvey to the house on Bridge Street. It's no problem at all.
If you're really sure about this, Amanda.
Absolutely,
she says, looking pleased about the idea of running the show without me. Well, sir, I'll go and get my car out of the underground parking. You can follow me. What car are you driving in, sir? A white Nissan, he tells me. Before long, Mr. Harvey is following me in his truck. I wouldn't normally go out of a limb like this for a client spontaneously, so late in the day. Show a perfect stranger around a property that is a little out of the way, in an unpopulated part of Seattle, well off the beaten track. I know my manager, Rob Lowe, would be mad at me. But he's not here, and these are extenuating circumstances after all, as the gentleman, Mr. Harvey, is going to be catching a flight to Chicago later this evening. I drive to the property on Bridge Street, with the Nissan close behind me. Something is bothering me, and I'm not sure what it is. I mean, the Steve Harvey character looks to be moneyed, well-to-do, smartly presented, an above-board gentleman. Well, so it seems. So why do I feel so uneasy? I feel as if my guts are actually squirming. That's never happened to me before. It's like I have this pervasive, unsettling feeling whipping up in my body, like a wind brewing across the horizon. I'm not the nervous type of person, so what the hell is wrong with me? I realise maybe I'm a bit keyed up, as this enigmatic stranger never removed his dark glasses, not even once when he was in the agency, and it was rather light in there. That dawning revelation is troublesome to me. But of course I'm overreacting, I tell myself. I mean, a lot of people wear dark glasses indoors and never remove them, don't they? Finally, we've arrived at the residence in Bridge Street. I park my car on the red brick driveway, followed by Steve Harvey, who parks his Nissan truck directly behind my white Honda. Steve Harvey ambles up to me, with his hands tucked in his suit pocket. If I didn't know any better, I'd say there's a haughty swagger in his walk, while the limp in his leg is barely conspicuous anymore, which I find rather peculiar. Steve's face is lit up by an over-exaggerated bright flashing smile that would make the fireworks on the 4th of July seem rather dull. Who has teeth this white that make the fluffy clouds in the sky look grey? I notice his smile looks uncomfortably victorious, as if he's very pleased that he got his way by getting me to come out here against office protocol. Maybe he likes asserting his authority and dominance, getting people to do his bidding at the drop of a hat. I decide privately he looks the type, the spoilt rich brat who thinks he can buy everything. I really appreciate this, Mrs. Jensen, he says, going out of your way to show me the property. The gentleman removes his dark glasses for the first time. I observe his deep-set brown squinty eyes, that you actually might see in a bull terrier. I actually quite like bull terriers, but I don't like his eyes. Once again I feel uneasy prickles descending down my spine, but I choose wilfully to ignore them. I can't focus on that. I absolutely can't. So what is it about this property that interests you, I ask, opening the ornate front door with the keys from my purse, leading him through the old Victorian home that is in a very bad state of repair. I imagine you saw this online in Chicago, as you were saying. That's right. I saw it online. I was very intrigued. I love Victorian properties, but I will never buy a property, as I was telling you, without seeing it personally. That would be a very foolish thing to do. I do understand that. Sometimes things look glossier online than they do in real life. But I'm sure from your virtual tour you may have noticed that the owners have allowed the house to become somewhat dilapidated. Unfortunately, the lady who owns the property had to give up her job when she became pregnant. Then her husband got laid off. You know how the story goes. They had dreams for this place, big dreams. But sadly they didn't have the funds or resources to inject in the place. Awful pity, I know. But that is the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. They're eager to sell now. I think, given the current bleak condition of the place, you could get away with putting in a lower offer if you're interested in the place. But it is going to need a lot of work, as you can see. There's peeling wallpaper, creaking floorboards, a staircase that is in a bad state of repair. But don't go too low in your offer. There are people out there who will pay the full asking price for a place like this in a heartbeat. They won't want it to slip through their fingers at any cost. Victorian properties of this age are not easy to pick up on the market. There's a huge demand for them of late. How long has it been on the market? It's been on the market for about 3 or 4 days now. In truth, I'm rather bewildered. I haven't had more inquiries. You're one of the first. Maybe the peeling wallpaper is very off-putting, I joke. A lot of people like to move into a house without having to put in much work. This place is going to need a plethora of TLC. I'm not worried about that at all. This is the perfect fixer-upper. I'll go around the property to make some notes of what needs to be done. Would you like me to show you around the place, or would you like to view it on your own? I think I'll view it on my own, if I may. I'll be in the living room if you need me, I say, sitting down on the sofa in the living room, secretly grateful that he doesn't want me to accompany him around the property. Today's been one of those less than desirable days, that whatever could have gone wrong certainly did. Starting with that awful migraine headache, arriving at work late, dealing with a couple of irate customers, showing a random last-minute client around an empty property in an isolated part of Seattle. All I want to do is to go home right now. But I better phone the estate agent's office to find out how Amanda's doing. Are you managing, Amanda? I ask her. I'm sorry to have abandoned you like that. It's fine. The phone hasn't rung since you left. I sigh with relief. Well, that's good news. Don't forget when you go home tonight after you've locked up to take the keys home with you. Tomorrow you can open the offices yourself. How's the viewing going with that smart gentleman? He looks like he's loaded. Seems to be going rather well, I think. He appears to be very, well, intrigued by the place, I think. I think I can smell a sale on the horizon. I'll speak to you in the morning. I look up to see Mr. Harvey standing there grinning at me. I've seen what I need to see, he explains. I need to do some costings at home, and then I will put in my offer. Oh, I'm so pleased. You were right. It was worth my while bringing you out here. It's good to meet you, Mr. Harvey. I'm sure we'll be keeping in touch over the phone. Once again I reach out to shake his hand, forgetting about his excruciatingly hard handshake. He squeezes my hand so tightly again. I secretly wince in pain, but I don't show it on my face. I watch Mr. Harvey getting into his Nissan, and after I've locked up the Victorian property, I place the key in my purse and amble over to my car. I open the door and sink back in the leather seats gratefully, sighing with relief. This day just can't end soon enough. I just can't wait to get home. My feet are killing me. I had absolutely no idea these patent shoes would be so uncomfortable. Then I remember I've only worn them a couple of times. They're very narrow. I press the keys in the ignition, turning on the engine of my truck. The petrol gauge is flashing. I gasp with horror when I discover I have a completely empty tank. How did that happen? I don't understand, I think to myself. I filled the tank only the other day. What the hell is going on? Just when I thought there was a promising rainbow at the end of the clouds, another disaster looms on the horizon. I'll have to call my husband to pick me up. This is a complete nightmare. I've never run out of petrol before. I'm usually so on the ball. I'm about to phone my husband when someone is tapping at my window. I look up in surprise to see Mr. Harvey standing there with a huge grin plastered on his face. I don't like the way he's smiling at me. It's giving me the creeps. I'm surprised he's still there. I thought he would have left long time ago. He's tapping on the window. Are you all right in there? I roll down the windscreen. My petrol tank is empty. I'm giving my husband a call to bring me some gas. Don't be silly. Let me take you to the gas station myself. I'll bring you right back here. Don't be ridiculous, I say. You've got to go to the airport. You've got a plane to catch in Chicago. I've got time to spare. I insist on giving you a lift.
This is incredibly kind of you, Mr. Harvey. I'm most obliged, I say as I climb into the seat next to his, sinking back gratefully into the white leather seats, dutifully pulling a safety belt over my shoulders and clinking it into the slot on my side. Is this a hire car, I wonder to myself clandestinely, glancing briefly around the dusty interiors. It smells of stale cigarette smoke, and it isn't tidy, as there's chip packets and empty bottles of Mountain Dew lying at my feet that have failed to make their way to the dumpster, which seriously contradicts Mr. Harvey's immaculate appearance. There are a couple of kids' toys lightly tossed over the back seats, a sight which troubles me rather than offers me any reassurance. Maybe he's borrowed a friend's car, I tell myself. Of course, that's what this is. Mr. Harvey turns the interior locking system on, which unsettles me slightly, but I imagine a lot of people do this. Slowly he starts up the engine, tuning into the classic radio station. The car speedily rolls away from the Victorian house. In a trice I notice Mr. Harvey drives in the opposite direction of the gas station. My heckles begin to rise, while an icy cold chill rolls down my spine. Don't panic, I reassure myself. This is just a harmless, benign mistake. But after the less than savoury day I've had, I'm beginning to feel apprehensively guarded. I think you're slightly lost, Mr. Harvey. You're going towards the countryside. You took the wrong turning. The gas station, it's in the other direction. I guess it's because you're from Chicago. It can be quite confusing out here, especially as it's getting dark. If you turn around, I'll show you the quickest route back. What makes you think I'm lost, young lady? What's your name, by the way? You call yourself Mrs. Jensen, but what is your first name? I don't think I got that. I notice his tone is sharpened. I was certain there was a hostile edge to his voice, but I must have imagined it. Maybe he's taking me to a gas station he's better acquainted with. I do know a lot of people are very selective about the gas stations they frequent, but this man is from Chicago. Would he even be familiar with the gas stations around here? Surely not. My name is Quinn, Mr. Harvey. Isn't that a Scottish name? He asks me. I think it is, but I don't have any Scottish heritage. But, sorry, if you don't mind me saying, you are driving in the wrong direction. He grins at me, pulls out a silver revolver, and points it at me. Oh, my God, is this really happening? Hello, Quinn. You're not the brightest brick in the block, are you? Did your parents never teach you not to speak or accept lift from strangers? Well, obviously not. For an estate agent, you're terribly naive. You made this remarkably easy for me. I was the one that stealthily sneaked out of the Victorian house when you weren't looking and siphoned all the petrol from your tank and got you to accept a lift with me. Look at you. You fell for my act, hook, line and sinker. Gullible you are. I saw the way the two of you were literally salivating over this expensive smart suit of mine I'm wearing. Smelt the money on me, did you? Affluence and success. It always makes people trust me. You're quite the gullible one, are you not? I am so stunned by the silver revolver he's pointing at me.
that I'm lost for words. I gulp the air in abject horror. I'm gawking at the revolver, trying to process everything that is transpiring. My mind is failing abysmally to fire on all its cylinders. I'm trying to accept the fact that this really is occurring right now. It feels so surreal, like a dream, as if it's unfolding and happening to somebody else. But of course everything he's saying is absolutely true. I've been grossly naive, insanely ignorant. I didn't employ any precautionary measures when it came to assisting the stranger and showing him around the Victorian property. I trusted him more, just because he appeared wealthy and affluent. I threw all caution to the wind. That's ridiculous. I'm ridiculous, just because someone appears respectable, successfully prosperous and well-to-do, doesn't make them more trustworthy at all. Indeed, some wealthy people can be among the most crooked, a fact so often easily overlooked, especially by impressionable people like me. I did recall having misgivings about him. The way he was wearing those dark shades, for example, in the estate agents, did give me a moment's pause. And then the way he squeezed my hand so tightly, almost as if he deliberately wanted to hurt me. I'm cursing myself now for my stupidity. I consider myself a professional, astute estate agent, but I'm clearly an appalling judge of character. To be caught up in this scenario, a bad day for me has got significantly so much worse, and the nightmare has steadily gone up several notches. How am I going to get out of this situation? My mind is inwardly screaming. Mr. Harvey continues rambling on, oblivious to the scrambled state of my mind. I'm hardly hearing a word he says, as I'm having an inward chastisement with myself for being such a bloody fool, for being so incredibly ignorant, so very stupid. My name is not Mr. Harvey, and I'm not from Chicago. I've lived here in Seattle all my life, and I've absolutely no interest whatsoever in Victorian properties, he chuckles. Who in their right mind would buy an eyesore like that? I chose the spot as it was isolated. No one would see me giving you a lift. Look at it, the sky is already black. I'm pointing a rifle at you, and you're rarely in a precarious situation, he says, sounding exceedingly pleased with himself. Where are you taking me? And more to the point, what are your intentions with me, Mr. Harvey? I pause for a moment before he can answer me, and pipe, Look, Mr. Harvey. My name is not Harvey. It's Derek. Call me Derek. Look, Derek, let's just pretend this never happened. Please, will you just drop me off at the gas station? That's all you need to do. Take me back to the gas station. We need say no more about this. I won't tell anybody about you, nor that you pointed a rifle at me. Let's just pretend that this didn't happen at all. Derek places the rifle at my temple. Shut up, bitch! Shut the F up! I'm so stunned, because up to this point in time he's spoken to me like a relatively civilized human being. But now his tone has dramatically changed. He's become much more aggressive. I hate it when people use the F word on me. I can see that by the contemptuous way he's looking at me. He possibly doesn't have much regard for women. Maybe he had issues with his mother growing up, and nurtured a deep hatred towards the female sex. I glance out of the window. It is tenebrous outside. Even I don't know where we are. We're outside Seattle in a remote area, that's for sure, without any street lights, nor have we seen many cars on the road. I glance out of the window and see high embankments with vertical silhouettes of trees on either side of the asphalt road. I can't even discern their specific species, for the solid black forms are hazy, without any distinguishing details. It's so pitch black out there. That's all I can see is black sky, a scattering of stars, a little moon, obscured by some dense cloud cover, which makes everything exceedingly dim. I decide to say nothing. I have to think straight. I have to get my mind in order. I have to decide what it is I need to do. But I don't have many options, do I? They're running dry. If I try to run from him, I risk being shot. I could try to establish a relationship with him, win him over, but I don't think that's likely to work. What the heck does he want from me? Then a direful, haunting thought comes flooding into my mind. Is this man intending to sexually molest me? Worse still, kill me? If that is the case, maybe it's worth taking the risk of fighting back with all my might. But that boldly courageous thought is immediately suppressed by my vacillating doubts and wavering uncertainties about what kind of tactic to employ here. Finally, Derek's Nissan pulls over the pebbly lay-by on the side of the road. He parks his truck, holding his rifle directly at me. For a brief moment, a fleeting second, I did consider wrestling him for the rifle, but he's much stronger than I am. It could get messy, with disastrous consequences that I cannot consider entertaining, or I'll lose all sense of control. He asks me to remove his torch for him from the cubbyhole in front of me. I hand it over to him. "Get out of the truck now," he demands. "Leave your bag on the seat. Hand me your cell phone." I do exactly as he says. My heart begins to thrash violently inside my chest. My body is trembling and quivering like a jelly. Fear has literally leached onto my body, holding me hostage to a sense of foreboding that is so dreadful that words can't articulate the hopeless despair that is now birthed within me. This is not looking good. Not looking good at all. I mean, we're in the middle of nowhere, without a solitary soul in sight. I'm surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of trees. He's demanding me to get out of the truck. Every part of me wants to run away from him as fast as I possibly can. But I can't even find the strength in my legs to move much. My body is not cooperating with my mind. It's being stubbornly resistant. My legs wobble precariously beneath me like two unsteady camping chairs, barely able to support my withering weight. I feel 2 streaks of water trickling down my cheeks like raindrops. I taste the salt on my tongue. I'm crying. I close the truck door behind me, following the light of Derek's torch as we walk up a slight hilly embankment through a remote woodland trail. My unsteadiness escalates. I stumble all over the place, over pieces of shrubbery, uneven tufts of grass that poke through the precipitous trail, jagged rocks that seem to be lying in wait to trip me up like invisible landmines. "Keep moving. Keep walking. Stop slowing down." I can feel his revolver being poked in my back. My life is flashing before me as fear charges through my veins. What if I never get out of here alive? More tears slip down my face. My insides grow hollow. Words I want to express appear to have abandoned me. A thick fog develops at the back of my throat. I trudge over fallen leaves, logs lying strewn precariously across the woodland path, covered with a plethora of moss. "Quit dawdling," comes Derek's voice again. "Stop slowing the F down." I continue to walk forwards, my body barely being able to hold its own weight up, my legs so heavy that every step feels as if I'm lifting up a concrete block. It's almost as if I'm playing a part in an ambiguous movie, that I'm looking at myself from outside my body with a passive indifference. Is this nature's masterful way of dealing with a horrifying situation, like the likes of such that I'm embroiled in now? Pretending to myself that this is happening to someone else, and it's not happening to me. It's certainly easier that way. "Pass me the popcorn, please." Yet deep in my gut, I cannot lie to myself. I know this is no movie. This is unfolding right now, this very minute. The night is uncongenial, hostile, tenebrous, menacing. It accommodates all that is clandestinely hidden in its dark shadows. All that is evil can loiter in this unassuming darkness. The trees are witness to the many deadly secrets that lie here. Their dark, towering forms seem to oppressively close in on me, almost as if they're in allegiance with Derek and are out to get me. It feels as if everyone and everything is against me. The trees rustle, their boughs jiggle. A whistling wind whips through the forest and thrashes against my face so hard. I feel as if my burning cheeks have been hit 12 times over with cold, freezing hands. I'm shivering, though, not with cold, but with fear, even though the temperature has dropped considerably, But cold has not gripped my body. It's basking in a sauna of its own fear, so that the hot steam has dappled my own back in beads of perspiration. "Get over there," snaps Derek. The light of his torch reveals a rather rugged-looking building, made out of dark timber beams. The shed looks antique, almost as if it's been in this forest for over 100 years, possibly more. Maybe it was used for storing wood. Derek pushes me into the shed. He demands I sit up on a pop-up mattress, which is covered by a flimsy blanket and a pillow that smells of mildew. "Sit up!" To my horror, he yanks one of my legs forward. He cradles one of my feet in his hands. I cry out in pain. He attaches a chain to my ankle, which is fastened securely to the floor. So, like a dog bound to a tree with a long chain, to give me a little mobility and leg room, but not much. I'm not going to get very far. The chain is solid. I test it with my feet. "You're not going to get far," says Derek, repeating my very thoughts. "The chain is very, very secure."
Are you going to keep me here like a dog? What do you want with me, Derek?
"All will be revealed very soon," he says. "If you cooperate with me, only then will I give you food and water. Otherwise you will starve to death and die of dehydration." With the light of Derek's torch, I see a woman's shoe lying on the floor. Was there someone here before me, I wonder? The full horror of this revelation hits me hard, like a brick to the head. Derek sees my eyes on the shoe and grins. "That's what happens to people who don't cooperate with me. I have no time for people like that."
"Where is the girl that was here before me?" I ask. "What have you done with her?"
"She didn't cooperate, did she? So I had to get rid of her. She bit me too many times," he says, rolling back a sleeve to show me some bite marks on his skin. "Wild animals have to be put down, don't they? I'm hoping you'll be a little bit more domesticated. If you're not, you'll end up joining her, pushing up the daisies."
"You're sick. You're seriously sick, you know that. Twisted in the head. You need help. You're not normal. You're disgusting."
"That's what my mother used to say. Derek, you're not normal. I'd be careful using words like that on me. They won't serve you well. They certainly didn't serve my mother's best interest. No one talks to me like that and expects to breathe the same oxygen as me. Do you understand what I'm saying?"
"Where is she now, your mother?"
"I'm surprised you even need to ask. I leave no job unfinished. She's pushing up the daisies very nicely, along with that girl whose shoe is lying next to you. Now I will leave you to marinate here for a couple of nights without water and food, and hopefully then you'll be more compliant to do exactly what I want. You can scream as much as you like out here. This place is very secluded, far away from anywhere. It's only the coyotes that will hear your frantic screams during the night, and they won't be much help to you. So I would give up while I was ahead if I was you. That girl that bit me lost her voice. I guess she screamed so much, but as you can see, it didn't do her any good. By the way, you see that bucket over there? It's for your ablutions, and there's loo roll, so you can't say I'm being unreasonable."
"Really? I can't say you're being unreasonable? My word, Derek, you're the most unreasonable person I've ever met." The next thing I know, Derek bolts the door behind him. There's a lock. I can hear it clicking. Then he's gone. The shed is swept in darkness. It's so jet black in the shed that I can't even see my own hand before my face, although I can hear a scuttling, scratching sound that makes me believe I'm not entirely alone, and possibly sharing this old shed that smells of dust with a mouse. Oddly enough, this revelation enables me to feel a little less alone. I think about my husband, Eric. He's going to be frantic, wondering where I am and why I never returned home. I still can't get my head around the fact that this has happened to me. Derek was right. I'm not as astute as I should be. The whole thing was a set-up from the very beginning, which I fell for. And Derek had cunningly planned this whole abduction. I'm not sure he singled me out intentionally. I think he would be happy with any woman he thought would be compliant.
I realise he possibly wants me as some kind of a sex slave. The nefarious thought sends shudders of horror coursing down my spine like laser beams. I think he believes by starving me, depriving me of water, I'm going to oblige his every request. Whoever the girl was he abducted before me, it took some nerve on her part biting him like she did. But this man, he has no patience. I can tell by his indifferent, apathetic personality that if you put up too much of a fight, it's lights out for you, as it's easy for him to find another replacement who'll be much more obliging and amenable to do his bidding. I'm surprised my eyes are dry. I'm not crying. Maybe I'm just so shocked. But I just lie there in the darkness, pulling the flimsy blanket over my head. This has got to be the worst day of my entire life, but I'm not going to fight it any more. I'm too tired to think straight. My thoughts are all jumbled. I need to conserve my energy. If I cry into my pillow all night, it'll be so futile. It's best not to think about things too intently. Sometimes thinking too much can torment your mind. I rarely need to alienate myself from my emotions to survive this experience. As come what may, I'm going to get out of here. And if needs must, I will do whatever it takes to make sure Derek doesn't harm a single hair on my head. I'm grateful for this blanket and the pop-up mattress, even though it stinks to high heaven of damp and mildew, but it's better than freezing to death on the cold floor. My once hot body, heated by my own angst, is shivering with cold now. My clothes are damp from my own sweat. I pull the blanket over me and finally slip into a deep sleep. I awaken in the morning to the sound of pretty birdsong in the valley. At first, when I open my eyes, I'm rather disorientated and confused. Where the heck am I? I'm expecting to see my husband's lumpy form lying on the opposite side of the bed to me, and to see the familiar fixtures and fittings of my own bedroom, like the gold and green upholstered chair in the far corner, with the black clothes I'd worn the day before carelessly flung over them, and my cat Ernest lying on my clothes, which is something he loved to do. But there's no upholstered chair there, no yellow eyes gazing back at me from the chair as I peer over the cover, no glass of water on my bedside table. Instead, I find myself staring into a confined space, which I can see in the cold light of the morning is strewn with a thin layer of red dust, and there are a plethora of spider webs scattered all over the sides of the wall, their silvery threads gleaming in the early morning light. Everything comes flooding back to me, all the memories and the horrors of the previous day. It brings a bitter taste of nausea bubbling up to the back of my throat. I realise the horrifying truth of my grave predicament. I rise up from my pop-up mattress and walk with a longish chain still attached to my feet towards what I believe is a window, but it's boarded up. I'm glad to say if you lift the board off its hinges, rather like a painting from a picture hook, I'm then fortunately exposed to a wide-open window, with no pane, from which I can see the forest clearly. In the daytime, this woodland sanctuary looks quite different to the sinister impression it conveyed the previous night. Indeed, it is spectacularly transfixing. I notice a hawk flying above the canopy of the trees, scanning the lower branches for breakfast, obliviously unaware of the horrors below him. For a moment the magic of this viridescent wonderland seizes my attention, as I'm swept up in the beauty of this moment, as I observe a soft ethereal light dancing through the trees, and watch a couple of squirrels darting up a tree branch with bright shining black eyes. I hope the hawk doesn't spot them. They're far too cute to eat. My eyes glance down at my bare foot, chained to the floor. I use my hands to tug at the chain as hard as I possibly can, trying to break it off. But as I suspected, it's firmly secured, and there is no shifting it. I reluctantly make my way to the ablution bucket for the indignity of my morning pee, and then I sink back into my pop-up mattress, pondering what I need to do. I think back about what my father would say about my sticky predicament if he was still alive. He was involved in Operation Desert Storm during the Gulf War in 1991. I think he was in the 1st Battalion, in the 327th Infantry, where they were responsible for capturing an enemy bunker that contained a large cache of ammunition, weapons and soldiers, including a battalion commander and his staff. My father always taught me, "Quinn, if there is anything your father can teach you, the best thing you can do, if you ever get caught up in a dangerous situation, is to abandon your emotions. They will never serve you well. Emotions rob you of rational thinking. They steal your common sense, consume your attention, impede your natural reflexes, freeze up your physical responses, and obscure the path to enlightenment. Never, Quinn, allow your emotions to take the pilot's seat of your inward jet, because you will come to a crash landing from which there will be no escape. I can hear my father's words springing into my mind. How I wish he were around now. But shortly after the Gulf War, he unfortunately died of a heart attack, when he had no signs of heart disease in his body. So his fortuitous death was something my family had never anticipated. I missed my father a lot, but although he was deceased, his words remained alive in me. Now they came to life again. My father was right. I couldn't allow myself to get upset. I had to think about how I was going to get out of this precarious predicament that I found myself in right now. How to get the hell out of here. My eyes are drawn to some carved writing in the wood of the floor. It reads, "Anna Barnes was here. Derek is a monster." I can't allow myself to think about this poor girl, whose red leather shoe lies ominously on the ground. I imagine her remains could be scattered anywhere in this forest, and hell would freeze over before my body would be joining hers. All afternoon I meditate on all kinds of scenarios of which I might be able to effect an escape, when my attention is drawn to a whistling sound. Someone is whistling in the woods. Oh my God! If I can get their attention, maybe I can acquire some much-needed help. The whistling continues. It's getting closer and closer. I begin to bang the wooden board that covered the open window against the wooden wall of the shed, and I cry out for help. "Help! Help! Help! Is anyone there?" That's when I see this 3-foot figure. It's long and lanky, very slender but muscular, with a pyramid-shaped head and human-looking face. It's covered in long silvery hair, and looks to be young. I think it's male. It stands still, peering at me. I can see its expression is one of bewilderment. It has not expected to see me in the woods. It immediately stops whistling as it stares at me through deep-set golden-brown eyes that grow as round as saucers and rather remind me of my cat's eyes, only they're infinitely bigger. I realise at once that he's got to be a juvenile Bigfoot. This creature is exceptionally human-looking. Are you kidding me? Are these things even real? But there's no other explanation to what this thing possibly could be. It moves towards my open window to observe me a little closer, as if it's not exactly sure that I'm real. It appears to keep a safe, cautious distance away from me. I sense it's a shy, evasive creature. "Please help me! Please! Please help me! Please can you help me?" I cry out to this Bigfoot. "Please! Please help me!" I oscillate my arms into gestures that I believe convey to the creature that I'm trapped and I desperately need help. I think the Bigfoot has understood what I'm saying, but instead of coming to my help, he simply glides away and is gone. I sigh wearily, with a bitter disappointment that is so pronounced I can actually taste it. I think I scared it off. I know it could have helped me. I sense no malice in its demeanour, only a little apprehension, as it was obviously uncertain about me. Even at 3 foot, the thing was infinitely stronger than I am. I hear a shrill-sounding whistle in the distance, and what sounds like another whistle in response, as if people are calling each other by manner of communication. Is it possible to dare to hope that the little Bigfoot went to call for reinforcements? And if he did, would a Bigfoot be willing to rescue me? Or would they have a nefarious agenda all of their own? I can't be sure. That's when I see the little Bigfoot is leading a huge female Bigfoot towards my shed by the hand, like a child eager to show his mother something of interest. The creature he's leading by the hand, I assume, has got to be his mother. She's clearly female, titanic in size, built like a solid, robust army tank. I think she's easily over 8 foot tall, possibly taller, and 700 pounds at the very least. 3 foot to 4 foot wide across the shoulder area. Like her son, she's covered in a long, silvery, sleek hair that has a blue tinge to it. The colour reminiscent of a silverback gorilla, only there's much more blue in the grey, possibly more like the nebulung Russian blue cat. It's an exquisite colour. This Bigfoot's hair is so silky smooth, it gleams with an incredible health. Her young son's hair is much more wispy and shows off a lot of the underlying grey skin, but her hair covers her entire body in a resplendent curtain of grey. She possesses overlong arms that trail beyond the knees, but although she's female, she is what they call, in the athletic world, a lean, mean, powerful machine, in terms of her body type. Her undulating breasts are the only slightly hilly appendages on her chest, although her nipples are pert. Her body is lavishly well appointed with dense muscle. Without a shadow of a doubt, her stomach is a six-pack that would make many an aspiring athlete wince with envy to have a stomach as toned and defined as that. The large female Bigfoot has not noticed me yet. She's been led by the hand by her little son, who is heavily engaged in earnest conversation with her, and has her full undivided attention. They're speaking to each other in a very expressive language that engages much facial expression, hand gestures and clicks, while the language itself sounds ancient in its origins, as if it's been around far longer than before English ever graced this planet with her flowery expressive words. The little Bigfoot points directly at me. His mother is staring in my direction. Her beady eyes appear to have observed me. I lean my head out of the window and say, "Please help me! Please help me! I'm trapped!" I emulate some of the gestures the Bigfoots had used when engaged in conversation together, so that I might come across as relatable to them. The female Bigfoot stands very still. She studies me for a long moment, as if she's looking at a huge piece of art at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, in the Picasso section, and trying to make sense of it, and what the artist is trying to convey. She is befuddled about my presence, much like her son had been moments before, as if she can't quite comprehend what I'm doing in the middle of the forest, locked up in a shed. "Help!" I say again. "Please help!" The female Bigfoot hesitates for a brief second, but she gets cautiously closer, like a cat stealthily sneaking up on its prey, and recruiting patience for its advantage. I see her head 2 feet away from mine, looking at me through the open window. I discern her head is distinctive in its pyramid shape. It blends seamlessly into the shoulders, and although on first impression she looks like she doesn't have a neck, I can see clearly that she certainly does, but it's not that easy to behold, as it's exceedingly short and stocky. The Bigfoot's feminine heart-shaped face is infused with an aura of intelligent discernment. She turns around to look directly at me. Her skin is grey like an elephant or rhino in its colour. It's leathery in texture, possessing a smooth sheen. Her nose is flat, pinned tightly against her face. Her forehead is crinkled but sloped, her cheekbones high and chiselled, her chin symmetrical. But it's her treacle eyes that dance with gold, yellow and orange flecks that grab my attention. They are the most beautiful eyes I have ever beheld. They are dappled by a kind, magnanimous grace and tenderness that is so palpable. When she looks at me, it's like she's reading me like the words from a book, as if she's flicking through the pages to find out exactly who I am. I know that sounds insanely crazy, but it's profoundly true. I point to the door. The Bigfoot moves towards the door, her thick grey fingers examining the lock. To my amazement, she tugs at the metal lock on the door, and it breaks off, along with the hinges in her hands, and falls onto the forest floor, where it lands on the ground. She knocks open the door. It swings open. As she walks into the door, her face is bewildered to see my foot tied to the floor with a chain. She points it out to her son. For a moment they engage in assiduous, sober conversation, but she rips the chain off its hinges, which seems a light pull for her, and removes it from my feet, as if it was no trouble at all. When I realise I'm free, I rush towards her, as if she's my very best friend. I spontaneously give her a huge hug. If most people saw her, she would be terrifying to them, based on her mere size. I mean, would you go up to a wild elephant and randomly hug it? Of course not. This Bigfoot is intimidating like that. She's emotionally intelligent, intuitive, benevolent and kind. What's more, she's clearly distressed that someone had tied my foot to the floor. It bothers her a lot. I can see it clearly in her face. I could hear the words in my head. "Who did this to you?" "Bad man wanted my body," I say to her. "You know, bad way for his pleasure. That's what I think." She nods, shaking her head angrily. If I didn't know any better, I would actually say her nostrils were flaring. She knows what I'm talking about. She really does understand. She's shaking her head belligerently. Bad man, I say again, bad man did this to me. She nods. I know she comprehends exactly what I've said. I get the sense that if Derek was around right now, he wouldn't be for much longer. I need to get out of here. Can you help me? I guide her to a piece of clear sand, and with a stick I draw a road and a house. I point to the east and west, shrugging my shoulders. I need help, I tell her. The Bigfoot female draws pictures in the sand, one with a house to the east where she draws cows in a field, and another house to the west. Then she appears to be discussing where to guide me at length with her son, who has a whole lot to say on the matter. For a long while they're chatting backwards and forwards at each other, almost forgetting that I'm there. They get so involved in this conversation. My son says man with cows is good man. For a moment I thought the Bigfoot had spoken to me in English, but then I realised the words were communicated in my head. She had spoken to me telepathically. The female Bigfoot gestures for me to follow her. Her devoted son remains steadfastly by her side. I stumble behind her awkwardly. My legs are still failing to fire on all cylinders. I'm tripping all over rocks and tufts of grass, as everything in my path has become a liability to me. My aching sore feet are swollen in my shoes and chafing against the inner toe, which feels as if I'm being punnelled with sandpaper. These black patent shoes I'm wearing are quite literally killing me and making walking arduous. I realise the Bigfoot's frustrated by how slow I've become. I can't walk any faster, especially not in these. She turns around and looks at me, saying, very slow to my head, "Can I give you a ride?" She bends down and I climb on her shoulders. She holds my feet down with her hands, and then she and her son glide like galloping horses over the terrain. Even when she breathes, she sounds like a horse, but the ride on her shoulders is far smoother than any horse ride I've ever had. I glance down at the earthen floor, watching her feet as they press against the precipitous debris with such a seamless ease. I remember hearing once from something I'd listened to in the past that Bigfoots possess a pungent, offensive odour, but this was not so in her case. She smelt like my cat after he's rolling outside in the dust. Her body smelt like the dust of the earth, pine needles and wild flowers, a pleasant smell that wasn't in the least offensive. The Bigfoot ran through the trees, through fields of sagebrush, across meadows with cows were happily grazing, but they quickly got out of our way, watching us with an inquisitive curiosity. Finally the Bigfoot puts me down on the edge of a large post and rail wooden fence. She indicates to me that she can't go any further. Can't be seen, she says in my head. Mustn't be seen. I nod. I understand. I give her a huge thankful hug, and she surprises me by rubbing her head against my shoulders, which I think was her way of being affectionate towards me. I watch her gliding away, and then I climb under the fence and move towards this beautiful red brick symmetrical farmhouse with large white sash windows. I notice chickens clucking away in the backyard and pecking the ground. The back kitchen door has been left wide open. I hear a woman singing ABBA's song Dancing Queen. She has a beautiful voice. I knock on the door. I enter the kitchen. I don't think she's heard me, but the kitchen smells incredible. Melted cheese infuses the air. My stomach rumbles. She's standing at the range, her long auburn hair pulled away from her face. "Hello," I say. "Hello." The woman turns her head around to face me. She stares at me with eyes as round as saucers. "Are you a ghost?" "No, I'm not," I say, grinning. "Are you real?" "I'm real," I say, throwing out my arms. "You can touch me if you like." The woman touches me with relief. "Thank God you're real. What are you doing here? Who are you?" "I was kidnapped. I found my way to your farm. I need to call for help." My eyes stare longingly at the range. "Are you making mac and cheese?" She nods. "You want some?" "Now you're talking. I'm starving." The woman generously piles my plate with macaroni cheese. I dive hungrily into the cheese and pasta with gusto. She watches me curiously, delighting in how much I'm enjoying her food. "I'm sorry about earlier on. Me and my husband recently got married. He once saw a ghost in this farmhouse. I just thought you were that ghost. I'm sorry." "Do you mind if I call my husband?" I ask her. "He's possibly worried sick about me." Sure, she says, pulling out her cell phone from the back of her jeans. Would you like me to make you some tea? I nod while she bustles around the range with a kettle. My husband answers the phone. Eric? Quinn! Is that you? Where the hell have you been? I've been worried sick. To cut a long story short, my husband came to pick me up that day. The police came to interview me and ask me all kinds of curious questions. I gave them a description of Derek, but obviously they already acquired that description from Amanda, and subsequently realised something was terribly wrong when they discovered my Honda truck parked outside the Victorian house, but I was nowhere to be found. To all intents and purposes, no one knew who Steve Harvey or the mysterious Derek actually was. I never told them about the Bigfoots that rescued me, but when asked how I'd escaped, I made out that a strange vagrant that smelt very drunk had released me from my confines and bogged off. I found my way to the farmhouse forthwith. I never told them about the Bigfoots that rescued me, but when asked how I'd escaped, I made out that a vagrant that smelt drunk had released me from my prison and bogged off. I had found my way to the farmhouse forthwith. I didn't want to tell anyone about the Bigfoots that rescued me. I was desirous to protect them. I told the police, though, about the shed, the red shoe, the carved writing on the floor. It would seem a girl called Anna Barnes did apparently go missing when she was asked to deliver a Bible at address of an abandoned house, and was never seen again after that. Suffice to say, it took the police a couple of days to finally find the shed in the wooded area, and what they saw shocked them to the core. They found Derek's head, decapitated from his body, lying displayed on top of the shed. His arms were dangling precariously over tree limbs, and his legs had been tied together by the chain that had tied my foot to the floor. I was told by the police officer they couldn't fathom why Derek had been killed in this gruesome, macabre way. The man was not wanted, nor linked to any known crimes that they knew about, but his mother had vanished in the early 80s and reported missing, and he was clearly considered responsible for the disappearance and possible death of Anna Barnes. I gather her own brother described him as possessing a macabre hatred towards women. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I came to the swift conclusion, from a very young age, that some people just enjoy being objectionably disrespectful, brutally blunt, and insultingly rude. And that certainly could be said for our immediate next-door neighbour. Growing up, the cattle rancher who lived next door to us was possibly one of the most cantankerous, fractious, disagreeable men you ever had the privilege of meeting. We would call him Mr. Grim behind his back, but to most people in our town he was known as Farmer Grimshaw, and suffice to say, his captious reputation preceded him. It would seem that his obstreperous, opinionated, wilful, rather waspish approach towards other people meant that even the friendly folk in our town did their very best to avoid him, much like the Black Plague. If you were a woman having a bad hair day, you would soon learn to keep out of Mr. Grimshaw's way, for if you didn't, you could be assured that Mr. Grimshaw would soon let you know about what a sorry sight you looked indeed, as there was no holding back, nor any measure of restraint on his part. His ruthless cutting tongue could be as sharp as a razor. I remember on my mother's bad hair day, when she just wasn't feeling all that great, Mr. Grimshaw said to her, "See, Anna, by the looks of things you shouldn't have got out of bed this morning. You're a sight for sore eyes, and that hair of yours would make a hedgehog's spikes look flat." You may think he was trying to be funny, but humour was not in Mr. Grimshaw's personality. He was brutally honest, to the point of being offensive, and sometimes even downright cruel. He was a man in his late 40s, early 50s, whom had never been married, although at the time there were speculative rumours that abounded that he had been married at one point, and that his first wife had abandoned him on the second day of their marriage, as she had had about as much of him as she could take. But we thought the unfounded, hypothetical rumours were just idle conjecture. But Mrs. Adams, who was the town's biggest gossip, swore they were true. Farmer Grimshaw supported a full head of wispy straw-coloured hair. He had those blonde caterpillar eyebrows that were incredibly bushy. When he furrowed his brow together, it looked like there was a single long albino caterpillar crawling above his eyes. The man had 2 blue eyes that were deep set in his face, and close together, although one of his eyes was greyer than the other. But they were far too close on his face. Mr. Grimshaw had thin, mean lips, the top lip being so faint it was barely visible. He wore a miserable scowl, or what my brother Jack would always refer to as an upside-down smile on his face.
"I don't think he can smile the right way up,"
he'd say to me. I believe my brother was right, as never once did I see the man smile normally. Even the way Mr. Grimshaw walked was like a belligerent octopus swinging his arms back and forth, as he was always in a hurry. But my mother used to say that he likes to give off the quintessential "look at me, I'm so important" vibe. Mr. Grimshaw was exceedingly wounding. Without even trying, he had a stinger on him like a hornet, and his ability to offend someone ran as smoothly as a swift current dashing furiously over rocky boulders. My mother used to tell me it's called not having a filter, which meant he told you exactly what he thought. And sometimes you don't want to hear exactly what someone is thinking, as it might be too close for comfort. Like when Jack, my brother, started to learn to play the violin. He played what he'd learnt from a plethora of lessons to the townsfolk. Everyone clapped in encouragement, but Mr. Grimshaw said, "I'd quit while I was ahead, son, if I were you. Why everyone here is clapping, God only knows, but your music is horrendous." Mr. Grimshaw, people would say, "The boy's doing very well. He's only just learning." "Nonsense," piped Mr. Grimshaw. "You've either got it or you haven't. I'm sure the moment Picasso put pen to paper, everyone could see the man's potential. But Jack here has no embryonic prospects as a musician. I'm sorry, but it's the truth, and the truth needs telling." Of course, my brother had been completely gutted by the stinging assessment, and soon packed up playing the violin. He was so discouraged. Mr. Grimshaw had reduced many women in town to tears, which was something my father could not abide. But there wasn't a whole lot he could do about it, as despite his very best efforts to try and persuade Mr. Grimshaw to bite his tongue and restrain from saying something hurtful, it was poignantly evident my father's sagacious wisdom fell on deaf ears. Mr. Grimshaw inadvertently liked to set the cat among the pigeons, ruffle everyone's feathers, and I have a sneaky suspicion he actually enjoyed stirring the pot, although he never admitted as much. I remember he told the baker's wife, Orla, that he wasn't surprised her husband was leaving her. "I'd leave you too, Orla," he said. "Look at you. You're enormous. You're like a bloody hippo. I've been to Africa, and those things are massive, and very frightening too. If they roll over on you, you're as good as dead. Did you know that? They'll crush you to pieces." He was possibly terrified that you'd roll over on him during the night, suffocate him in his sleep. I'd feel the same way. Needless to say, I'm not surprised there aren't any doughnuts left to sell this morning. You've probably finished eating them yourself. Most of them are insulating your belly right now, which is why when I come in here to buy a baker's dozen, they're all bloody sold out every bloody time. "I have a slow metabolism, Mr. Grimshaw," she said gingerly. "For your information, I don't actually eat doughnuts. I'm on the Atkins diet. I'm not allowed any carbohydrates. I'm very well aware, Mr. Grimshaw, that I'm overweight, but that's not the reason I'm getting a divorce from my husband." She was trying her best to fight back the tears gathering at the back of her pretty brown eyes. "You don't eat doughnuts. I don't believe a word of it all. And this slow metabolism nonsense. Poppycock, that's what they all say when they justify being so big. It's an excuse, that's what it is." Orla had burst into tears. She'd run to the back of the bakery to recuperate, but we could hear her crying. Everyone had looked at Mr. Grimshaw, with jaws dropping to the ground, eyes as wide as saucers, as so astonished were they by his humiliating, condescending, and bluntly offensive words, as if they couldn't quite comprehend that he'd actually said what he'd said. I think they were so confounded that their response to this unfortunate scenario was somewhat hijacked by shock, as they didn't come to Orla's defence as they probably should have done so in the circumstances. Suffice to say, the incapacitating effects of shock can rather render one speechless. My mother thankfully did react. She was one of few women in our small town that was not intimidated or daunted by Mr. Grimshaw in the slightest. Something, I think, that actually made Mr. Grimshaw have a clandestine respect for my mother. She was not afraid to confront him on any subject, and she believed you always needed to stand up to a bully, to assert your confidence, and the bully would retreat. She was right about that. Mr. Grimshaw, that was very uncalled for, talking to Orla like that. You've really upset the poor girl. Mr. Grimshaw let out a huge, exasperated sigh. What's wrong with people? What on earth is wrong with people in this God-forsaken town? Too bloody frightened to step on anyone's toes by telling the truth? Orla needs to know. She's getting far too fat. It isn't good for her health. You don't need to inform her about that, Mr. Grimshaw. I think big people already know they're overweight. They don't need a big bully like you to rudely point it out to them. If that wasn't bad enough, he told the woman who runs the diner in town that she was like mutton dressed up as lamb. You try to look young, Miss Campbell, but you're not fooling anyone, so I would give your short skirts a miss. You're not doing anyone any favours showing off those unsightly knobbly knees of yours. Luckily, Miss Campbell did not suffer fools gladly. She had enough plucky spunk in her to give him as good as he gets. She delivered him his T-bone steak and the glass of Coca-Cola he'd ordered, which she wilfully poured all over his lap to maximise her revenge. Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Grimshaw. Really, I am. It was a dreadful accident, she piped, with an exaggerated look of concern on her face. And then she tried to dab his pants with a plethora of kitchen roll, which made Mr. Grimshaw look chastened. The obnoxious cattle rancher scowled at Miss Campbell and pushed her away with his arms. Get your hands off me, you klutz! You're a clumsy, stupid idiot! He staggered to his feet, retreating to the gentlemen's toilets, and returned with the front of his pants completely soaked. Miss Campbell struggled to conceal the smug smile that was developing on her face. She called out to all the diners, Everybody, please don't look at Mr. Grimshaw's pants. He's wet himself. He's had a little accident, I'm afraid to say. There were snorts of laughter around the diner, as people appreciated the joke, and Mr. Grimshaw's abashed scarlet face was a pleasing sight for many to see. I've not wet myself, he snapped churlishly. This bloody woman over here poured Coca-Cola all over the front of my pants, if you must know. It's all right, Mr. Grimshaw, cried out one of the men in the diner. Your secret's safe with us. I shan't be telling anyone about your unfortunate little accident. On a few occasions my mother had invited Mr. Grimshaw over to our place for an evening meal. She told us that whatever we may think of him, he was our next-door neighbour, and it was the polite thing to do, to invite him over to dinner. I believe emphatically that neighbours should always be on good terms with each other, she had insisted. We need to make an effort to get along with Mr. Grimshaw, even if he is a difficult character. I remember when the disagreeable man had come to dinner. He parked himself comfortably on our settee. My mother gave him a Scotch whisky, which he had gulped back in one swig, extending his arm out for a top-up seconds later. Mr. Grimshaw had the constitution of an ox. He could knock back excessive high alcoholic content drinks without becoming completely bladdered in the process. I hope, Sienna, he says to my mother, that you don't cook with garlic. I hate bloody garlic. People cook with it as they're so ineffectually crap in the kitchen, so they use it to disguise their lack of culinary prowess. These days it's in everything, adulterating food with its overpowering flavour. You can't go on the underground in France anywhere without being completely overwhelmed and inundated by the ghastly smell of garlic everywhere you go. Some people positively reek of the stuff. They eat it over there like minstrels, first thing in the morning. It can make your stomach hurl, let me tell you. Bloody ridiculous, if you ask me. They call themselves the best cooks in the world. My foot. We out-trump them any day of the week here in America. Let me tell you that. Not to worry, Mr. Grimshaw. My mother had said politely. "The chicken casserole I've made this evening is very flavourful. It's devoid of any garlic, so I think you'll be reasonably satisfied. It's an old recipe of my mother's, which people usually enjoy." I had been on the floor playing dominoes with my brother Jack, my one ear perked up like a dog, as I concentrated on the game, while eavesdropping at the same time on my parents' conversation with the odorous man, whose every single second word was bloody, and it seemed he didn't have a nice word to say for anyone in town, not even our local pastor, which really was derogatory. "Bloody fool, that nincompoop! Do you know he had the cheek to visit me recently, to tell me to mind my manners, that I'm offending people around town? I said to him, 'Pastor Ferris, the Christian faith is about telling the truth, is it not?' He says to me, 'Of course.' I say to him, 'I tell people the truth, Pastor Ferris, and if they don't want to bloody hear it, it's not my problem. People pussyfoot around the truth these days, but I say it as it is. If I think you look like you've been dragged through a hedge backwards, I'll tell you. Maybe you don't want to hear it, but it's what it is. It's the truth. Why can't people accept that?" My father makes an awkward sound at the back of his throat, as if he's trying to clear it. "I think, Mr. Grimshaw, what Pastor Ferris was trying to say is that maybe when you're talking to people, you should be a little bit more discreet. People can be easily offended and hurt." What's wrong with people these days? I keep saying that. They've got to bloody get over it. They've got no grit. If you say to me, "Mr. Grimshaw, you have a dreadful odour problem. You're not smelling very good these days," I'll accept your comments with grace. I'll try and rectify and redeem the problem. I'll be grateful to you. I wouldn't take offence to it. How can you address an issue if no one tells you about it? All of a sudden, our big ginger cat, Sammy, comes into the living room and jumps onto Mr. Grimshaw's lap and begins to settle on his lap, purring like a steam train, stretching out his long paws and beginning to look very settled and content, while Mr. Grimshaw is not quite sure exactly how to react, but he looks exceedingly put out about this presumptuous gesture on Sammy's part. Maybe it is true that cats are attracted to people that don't actually like them, like iron filings to a magnet.
"Sammy likes you, Mr. Grimshaw. I've never seen him so affectionate before."
"Well, the feeling's not mutual, as you can see. Can you not get the bloody thing off me? I've never been terribly fond of cats."
I remove Sammy from Mr. Grimshaw's lap, but Sammy is persistent and returns to Mr. Grimshaw immediately. He affectionately rubs his sleek body against the man's lower legs, purring like a lawnmower. And every time Mr. Grimshaw pushes him away with his feet, Sammy sees the gesture as a big, exciting game and begins to play with Mr. Grimshaw's laces ever so enthusiastically. I can see the peevish man would like nothing better than to kick the cat off him, so it seems that he's champing at the bit, trying very hard to behave himself, and is inwardly fighting some self-restraint. So maybe the man has some boundaries after all, and there are some lines he will not cross. I don't think he actually wants to offend my mother, which is one up for the books.
"Your cat's playing with my laces," says Mr. Grimshaw, biting his lips.
"Ignore him," says my mother. "If you give him attention, he'll be even more demanding, and you'll never be able to get rid of him. He might even follow you home. I can see he's taken quite a shine to you." Mr. Grimshaw doesn't look desperately pleased by this suggestion. I'm indicating to my brother with my second finger to follow me. We cautiously creep into the kitchen, while my mother is conveniently distracted in the living room with my father, entertaining our guest, both obliviously unaware that we have vacated the room for a brief second. Once in the kitchen, I surreptitiously pull a whole white garlic bulb from the string of garlic bulbs hanging on the hook above our kitchen range. I proceed to peel back 12 garlic cloves, which I neatly align on the wooden chopping board, exclusively reserved for garlic chopping. I whack them down with the back of a sharp knife, and then chop them finely, furiously fast, like a skilled chef.
"What are you doing with so much garlic?"
asked my brother, looking bewildered by my industriousness. He begins to furrow his forehead in perplexment.
"You're not making garlic bread, are you?"
I grin cheekily like a Cheshire cat.
Bro, it's called getting revenge in a subtle way. You heard Mr. Grimshaw. He loathes garlic. I thought I'd add a ton of garlic into the casserole to ruin his meal for him tonight. Brilliant! Why didn't I think of that? That's a fantastic idea, says my brother Jack, giving me a high five as he slaps his hand against mine.
He was always game for a good laugh. We discreetly, unbeknown to my mother, who if she knew what we were doing would have been appalled, added 12 cloves of garlic to the casserole, stirring it all in, feeling certain we had ruined the dish. "I can't wait until he tastes that," I whispered cheekily. It didn't matter to us in the slightest that we had ruined my mother's casserole. Not at all. That was insignificant. Getting one up on the old miserable codger was a satisfactory feeling indeed, especially after his mean comments about Jack and his violin. My brother was also more than willing to extract revenge. When my mother served out the chicken casserole that evening, bringing it over from the range to the kitchen table, I was surprised it smelt so good. You couldn't smell the strong, bitter, pungent garlic in the air as I was expecting. Still, I knew once Mr. Grimshaw had eaten a bite of the casserole, he would spit it out with disgust when he realised it was adulterated by a plethora of garlic. But I couldn't have been more wrong. My expectations were not magnanimously rewarded, as I'd so hoped. Nor did Mr. Grimshaw's benevolent reaction offer me any kind of satisfaction. Me and my brother were seated at the long oak wooden table in our kitchen that is neatly laid with shining glasses, white crockery, and a beautiful bowl of flowers in the centre of the table. I was holding my breath, clenching my knuckles so that the whites were showing, my eyes fixed on Mr. Grimshaw like a gog-eyed goldfish, as I waited with bated breath. My mother served up a large portion of steaming casserole to the hungry rancher. The one thing that ranchers in Colorado all have in common is they love their food and effortlessly work up a healthy appetite after expending a lot of physical exertion and energy out in the fields all day long, working with their cattle and managing their ranches. I was eagerly waiting for Mr. Grimshaw to hurl abuse at my mother about how he hated bloody garlic, and how she had in spite treacherously laced her casserole with garlic to deliberately upset him. Me and my brother exchanged sneaky, furtive glances as we watched Mr. Grimshaw put a mouthful of chicken and rice in his mouth, chewing it slowly. My eyes are so fixed on him, my heart is pounding excitedly in my chest. I am eagerly waiting for him to rudely spit the casserole out into the napkin. But it never happens. He has that annoying, contented, satisfied look on his face when someone is tasting something they're not expecting to enjoy so much, and then quite suddenly they discover it tastes quite marvellous, and they're pleasantly surprised. Mr. Grimshaw's eyes grow round with appreciation.
"My word," he says to my mother. "Sienna, you've excelled yourself here. This is quite simply the most marvellous chicken casserole I've ever tasted in my entire life."
My mother has won over Mr. Grimshaw most favourably. He's looking at her with doe eyes, as if he thinks she's almost as phenomenal as a chicken casserole itself. Maybe the best entrance point to his heart is through his stomach. By the way he attacked Orla at the bakery over the doughnuts, it would almost certainly seem so. "I told you it was good," said my mother, grinning widely from ear to ear, as she knew when she received a compliment from Mr. Grimshaw, he meant it from the bottom of his heart, as such flamboyant appraisal from the likes of him was rare indeed. I'm astounded by Mr. Grimshaw's reaction, so I hastily investigate the casserole for myself, certain that 12 cloves of garlic are going to taste poignantly strong. But I can't distinguish the garlic at all. The dish is more delicious than ever, almost as if the garlic has accentuated and intensified the other flavours of the dish, without being too dominant. Even my father comments on the casserole and says, "Sweetheart, even if I say so myself, I agree with Mr. Grimshaw. To date, this is quite literally the most delicious casserole you've ever made." When I informed my mother what we had sneakily done to the chicken casserole, she was gutted. "You mean you injected 12 chopped cloves of garlic into the casserole to get your back on Mr. Grimshaw? And he loved it." I'm trying to decide whether I'm amused or exceedingly annoyed. "Well, it proves one thing, Mummy.
Mr. Grimshaw doesn't hate garlic as much as he thinks he does.
To date, my mother now adds plenty of garlic to her chicken casserole during the cooking, and it always tastes amazing, and I'm not exactly sure why.
Why does Mr. Grimshaw have to be mean to everyone?
My brother Jack asked my mother once.
He's always upsetting everybody, hurting people's feelings.
Well, sweetheart, says my mother, some people are naturally miserable. Maybe they're unhappy. It makes them feel better about themselves to bring others down to their level.
But why would anyone be miserable living here in Colorado? This is the best place to live in the entire world. It should be a criminal offence to be melancholy here.
I mean, when we went to Hong Kong,
Mummy, there were people who lived in a tiny concrete, high-rise apartments. They were everywhere. Don't you remember them? They had no backyards. They hung their clothes on sticks outside the windows. They had the right to be sorrowful, but they were upbeat. But Mr. Grimshaw lives on a big farm with fresh air, mountain views, big sky, and I've never seen him smile once, not once. I feel sorry for his cows. I'm sure they must pick up his negative energy. Maybe it even affects the quality of the meat. You never know.
You make some excellent, valid points, sweetheart, says my mother. But it's what's in here that really counts, she says, pointing to the heart. You must remember we don't know anything about Mr. Grimshaw, do we? Maybe he's had a very sad upbringing. Who knows? We can't judge him too harshly. Let's just say people's enigmatic behaviour can often be traced back to their family roots or how they were actually raised. I heard a provocative true story once of a young kid being raised like a feral cat underneath the house. He was chained up night and day by his parents and brought in the cellar over the winter. But that child, when he grew up into an adult, he couldn't form any meaningful relationships with people. It was said he was one of the rudest, most contemptible characters that you could ever meet, possibly even more offensive than Mr. Grimshaw himself. So let's not be too quick to condemn the man. Even though Mr. Grimshaw always spoke his mind, he never revealed anything about his past to us. So theoretically, we never knew exactly where he came from, if he had any brothers or sisters or parents, or if indeed the rumours were true and he had been married at one time. He was not the kind of person that you felt comfortable about probing into his background without feeling as if you were coming across as a prying, interfering busybody. Think about it for a moment, sweetheart, pipes my mother again. If we were all the same, our lives would be dreadfully dull. You can say one thing about our small town. Everyone loves to hate Mr. Grimshaw. People adore gossiping about the dreadful things he said and did. Yet our lives would be a lot less colourful without the grumpy, disagreeable character. You have to admit that. Our Colorado farm had been twice as big over 170 years ago, owned by the Spencer family, where there'd been 2 farmhouses snuggled cosily together, in close proximity to each other, built lovingly by the 2 Spencer siblings, whom had successfully raised their own large families in 2 separate red-bricked farmhouses, managing the farms together as a joint family business, where in those days all family members were actively involved in every aspect of running the farm, although often outside help was also recruited. In the last 50 years, the farms had been subdivided into 2 plots of substantial-sized land, which meant that Farmer Grimshaw's farmhouse was on top of the hill, and ours was at the bottom of the hill, which was far too close for comfort, as the farmhouses were almost on top of each other, with Mr. Grimshaw's house giving you the impression that it was looking down on ours with a contemptuous, smug disregard, as if to say, I'm infinitely more superior to you. Suffice to say, our farmhouses were separated from Mr. Grimshaw's property by a long wooden post and rail fence, which had always required steadfast maintenance over the years. Both properties were blessed by vast sprawling grazing meadows for cattle, upon which stable blocks, barns, ponds and outbuildings had been built. Ostensibly the land on the right-hand side of the valley belonged to us, while Mr. Grimshaw's land was all on the left-hand side. If you looked towards the furthest distance on the left-hand side of the valley, you would see Mr. Grimshaw's Aberdeen Angus black cattle grazing in the field, while rising up in the background, like a faint suggestive line sketched with an ultrafine white pencil, you would see the billowing silvery silhouettes of the mountains that are so bleached, indefinite, vague, they blend seamlessly into the cobalt blue sky. If you don't look close enough, you might not even know they were there at all. But although the craggy definitions are obscurely imperceptible, if you study the horizon assiduously, you discern all the subtle, ambiguous, ethereal shadows in a kaleidoscope of elusive purples and blue hues, shading the contours of those mountains. Needless to say, from the north side of the valley, both properties were fringed by a large precipitous woodgrove that rose up on a very steep hilly incline, with a stream that meandered over the hill and down through the farms further afield. But this woodgrove was jointly shared by both our adjoining farms. I'm not being biased, well, maybe I am. If I'm being brutally honest with you, I believe our house was the more attractive of the two farmhouses, although I will concede that Mr. Grimshaw's property was nestled on a much higher elevation, so I imagine it must have possessed some prepossessing views over the valley that would easily outrival ours. To be fair, both the red-brick farmhouses complemented each other, like two twin buildings, although our farmhouse was significantly larger in size to Mr. Grimshaw's, as it was believed that Sadie Spencer, who owned our property, had over 8 children when she lived there. Both of the farmhouses are 2-story buildings, very rustic-looking, made from red brick, symmetrical with white sash windows, black shutters, 4 chimneys, and wraparound porches supported by white columns with steps leading to very polished white front doors. Me and my brother were similar in age. I was 10, he was 11. We slept in our own bedrooms next door to each other, which was the advantage of living in such a large house. I had a queen-size platform bed, with several white wooden drawers underneath it, so that I could store all my stuff and keep the rest of my bedroom relatively tidy. This was my mother's ingenious practical idea, as she knew I was inclined to be rather messy. My mother had painted the walls in my room a deep burgundy colour, and I liked the colour as my duvet cover and curtains had accents of the burgundy and gold in the fabric, and the room looked pleasingly masculine. I always slept with my sash window wide open, where on the outside of my wall was a white trellising, where my mother was growing purple wisteria against the red brick. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and was north-facing, so in the distance I could see the undulating curls of the hills that were elegantly graced by the towering verdant silhouettes of the Douglas firs, the blue spruces, and the ponderosa pine trees. I remember it was the beginning of a cruel, cruel summer. It arrived in Colorado that year, like an unwelcome hostile guest, with a swifter vengeance, like a steam train that chooses to belligerently bypass spring on its chugging journey through the seasons, holding us mercilessly to ransom, so we were fortuitously subjected to the soaring, unkind, muggy temperatures. I was quick to point out to my mother, if you're cold, you can put more blankets on your bed, but when you're hot, you cannot do much about it, unless you have effective air conditioning. Everything that year was insufferable. The excessive heat, the plants were wilting, the animals were tired and thirsty, and with my family, let's just say tempers were more than a little frayed. If that wasn't bad enough, the fan on my ceiling had broken down, which meant I was fighting a losing battle getting to sleep at night, and was seriously tempted to join my brother in his bedroom, where the fan actually worked. I remember the temperature outside my sash window was so warm, it felt like it was a sauna on the outside. Needless to say, most of the night I was tossing and turning. The heat was like an annoying sweaty hand that kept prodding me wide awake. But finally tiredness defeated the muggy temperatures, and against the odds I had fallen into a fitful sleep. I remember in my dream I heard this crashing sound, and then I got the sense that maybe this is not part of my dream at all, and that this noise is actually part of my reality. I then feel fingers prodding me sharply, as if someone is earnestly trying to wake me up. I think it's my brother Jack. I audibly groan. What does he want now? I've only just managed to get some much-needed shut-eye. I grumble, "Please, Jack, I'm hot. I've only just managed to get some sleep." I roll over, pulling the duvet over my head. I experience another sharp nudge. This time it's decidedly firmer and feels more urgent, as if my brother is really intent on getting my attention. Why doesn't he leave me alone? Doesn't he realize how exhausted I am? I can feel my mind jiggling with a resentful indignation. I manage to rise up out of my covers, hoisting myself up on my elbow, like a wary seal searching for an air hole under the ice. so that I can finally breathe. I sit up on my bed, against a plethora of fluffy pillows for support. I slowly open my eyes. It takes me a while to adjust to my natural environment, having been interrupted from the pleasantries of my dream state. For a moment, it's so hard to distinguish what is real and what's not. I find myself staring at this tenebrous shape that looks like a monstrous shadow person with bright yellow eyes that stare at me. I blink again, feeling so certain that this has got to be a dream, or just the most explicit haunting nightmare that I've ever had. But when I look up again, this huge monster is still staring at me. My first thought is, what the heck is that? I'm certain this has got to be a dream. There can be no other explanation for this. A cooler wind is now blowing through my window, while my deep burgundy curtains are blowing backwards and forwards ominously. I now am almost certain that I'm staring at a demon from hell. I mean, what else could it be? My bedroom is so dark that all I can see is the outlines of solid matter, from the bedside tables to the upholstered chair, and the open door of my closet that is now swinging precariously backwards and forwards in the breeze and making that ghostly squeaky sound that would make the more faint of heart burrow quickly under their covers in abject terror. I see this creature's distinctive pronounced profile, the rise and fall of a pointed head that folds down into these gargantuan shoulders in a single seamless sweep. Let's just say it is possibly the most terrifying thing that I've ever beheld. I mean, this thing has to be 9 foot tall, 4 foot wide across the shoulder area, and covered in black hair that is more dense and dark than the night itself. Indeed, the lofty, mighty proportions of this imposing beast, with intimidating representing its middle name, it has made my room fade away into obscurity. This creature has almost become my room. He's that large. I feel tiny and inconspicuous in his company, like a tiny mouse in the presence of the household tabby, at the mercy of this daunting predator that I'm doubtful I can possibly trust. Inwardly, I'm wrestling with myself to scream, but it's a losing battle. My body is failing to cooperate with me. When I open my mouth, nothing comes out. I just sip air. My mouth feels dry and scratchy, like sandpaper, as if a thick fog has blocked the back of my throat. This creature's got to be a demon. And why is it here for me? I must have done something so bad to call up a demon. Is he here to take me to hell? Am I about to die? A cold chill descends down my spine. My whole body seems to freeze up like an ice statue. My hand trembles as I reach for my burgundy bedside lamp, and I press the switch on. A subdued light filters through my room. I'm expecting the demon to have disappeared. Isn't that what happens when you expose it to light? But he's standing there. The light shadows are magnanimously highlighting the creature's features. I can see the creature clearly. To my astonishment, I realize it's a Bigfoot. There's a Bigfoot in my room! How the hell did he get in here? The creature points to the open sash window, as if to answer my question. I'm amazed. He climbed up the trellising, entered my room, but why? What could he possibly want with me? That's when I realize he heard my thoughts. He knew what I was thinking. This is incredible. This creature is telepathic. The words actually managed to come out. What do you want? I'm still afraid. I mean, no one expects a Bigfoot to enter their bedroom in the middle of the night, and God only knows what he wants with me. But when my eyes study the creature, they're drawn to his eyes, and then the fear I felt only moments before subsides, like a large nail being plundered into a beach ball, and then it just relaxes and deflates. To date, I've never seen such kind, compassionate eyes before. When you look at eyes like that, it's impossible for you to feel fear, for you know you're in the presence of a great good. The creature is indicating for me to follow it down the red-bricked wall of my bedroom, over the trellising. He needs to show me something, but what? The Bigfoot is indicating for me that he wants me to hurry up, so I rush over to my wardrobe and fumble around for my sneakers, which I throw onto my feet as quickly as I can, tying up my laces hastily, but in stiff knots. I really want to rush into my brother's bedroom and say, "Jack, there's a Bigfoot in my bedroom." I can't imagine what his reaction would be. I'd love to see it. He would absolutely believe I was winding him up. But I cannot do that. I can see that this male Bigfoot is impatient. He wants me to hurry, and I'm already slowing him down with my dawdling. I pull a cotton t-shirt over my boxers. I indicate to the Bigfoot that I'll go outside the house via the front door, as tackling the window trellising outside my window is more than a little precarious and rather dangerous. What if I slip and fall? I wouldn't attempt such a grievous fate in the cold light of day even, and I don't mind climbing trees, but the trellising on my outside wall, I'd never hasten to experiment with that. The creature has once again read my thoughts and intervenes without any prompting. I guess you could say he just throws me on his shoulders like a large sack of oranges. He climbs down the trellising outside my window, just balancing on it using only his big toe, I kid you not, to support his entire body weight. But he takes such wide steps down the trellising that we've reached the ground faster than you can say Jack Robinson. I just cling on to his shoulders tightly, pulling his body hair in my angst. But before I can express any misgivings, we're safely on the ground. That was quick. I'm seriously impressed. The Bigfoot is incredibly agile. He knows how to shift his weight so that anything he stands on can support his gargantuan body, which is incredulous. When I was on his back, I have to say I did not discern any foul odours. His body smell was pleasantly benign, and if he was inclined to smell bad, this heat wave would be the perfect opportunity. I've smelt gym changing rooms, far more offensive than he was. The Bigfoot is indicating for me to get a move on. It's all right for him. He can glide like the wind, but I'm considerably slower. It's dark outside, but the air is so much cooler. It's such a relief. And a soft wind is fanning through the grass, its breezy currents brushing against my cheeks, sweeping my hair away from my face. Oh, wow, this is lovely. After all the hellishly hot weather we've been having of late, for it to be this cool, it's got to be exceedingly late at night or early in the morning. I stumble awkwardly over the tufts of grass, for my eyesight fails to see every bump and curvature in the soil, every rock that's hell-bent on tripping me up. We're running through the fields towards the woodgrove. The smell of the ponderosa pines is very pronounced. It's lovely. I just shadow the Bigfoot as his silhouette is all I can really see. The moon seems obscured by cloud cover, and only a soft trail of silvery light peppers the dark sky. I hear the sound of cows mooing, the occasional owl hooting, the rustle of leaves as we approach the grove. The Bigfoot suddenly becomes very still. He tiptoes with me and points to a form sitting under a tree. I hear these stifled sobs. Help her! Help her! A voice enters my head. I'm not sure whether it is the Bigfoot speaking to me or not, but I think it is. There's a young woman sitting next to the tree, and she's sobbing. I walk over to her and sit right next to her. The Bigfoot is nodding at me encouragingly. He's gesturing with his hands. Go on, help her.
Hello, are you all right? I don't mean to scare you.
The woman looks at me through her tearful eyes. She looks oriental, as if she comes from Singapore or Thailand. I can't be sure. But what is she doing in the woodgrove, crying? Why is she so sad? And who is she?
Who are you?
She says to me.
My name is Bryce. I live at the red brick farmhouse over there. Where are you from?
My name is Quang, she says to me. I live at the farmhouse on the hill, next to yours. I think I've seen you before, in the field.
You mean you live with Farmer Grimshaw?
She nods and bursts into tears. Her tears roll down her cheeks.
But why do you live with him?
Because I'm his wife.
You're Farmer Grimshaw's wife? Since when?
He married me a week ago in Thailand. We came back here together. I thought it would be a whole new life for me in America. But Mr. Grimshaw, he's not a nice man. He says so many cruel things.
Don't take it personally. That's what he's like. He's very rude to people. If he thinks you're ugly, he won't even hesitate to tell you so. One day I broke out in zits on my chin. He said to me that my spots looked like the Milky Way had tattooed its impressions across my face. My mother says he just doesn't think before he speaks. Do you mind me asking you a personal question? But why did you marry him? I wanted to come to America to have a whole new life here, to send my family money. I joined a marriage agency, and Mr. Grimshaw was interested in me because I spoke English. But when I came here to America, it's like he wants to hide me away from everyone in this house. He treats me like a servant. I do all the cooking and cleaning now. I don't mind that. But he ignores me all the time. I get so lonely. He told me he wanted to marry into my culture because his wife from Tennessee only lasted one day with him, and then after that she filed for divorce. This isn't what I signed up for. I want to go back home to Thailand, to my people. I miss my family. I'm trapped here. I haven't got any money for an air ticket. How am I ever going to get back home? I wish I hadn't done this stupid thing. Everybody told me it was a stupid thing to do, but I just had these aspirations.
I look up to see if the Bigfoot is there. He meets my eyes. I hear the words in my head, "Help her, help her." Then he turns around and glides away. To cut a long story short, I brought Quang back to our home. She engaged in long, meaningful conversation with my mother. My mother knew a divorce attorney who helped Quang file for a divorce, and my mother actually brought Quang an air ticket and gave her spending money to get back home to her native Thailand. All these years later, my parents still send her money every year to help her family out. Needless to say, she warned other Thai girls not to go down that marriage route, as the grass isn't always greener on the other side, she told them. I never ever told anyone about the Bigfoot that entered my bedroom, but I think he picked up Quang's sad energy. He knew she needed human help. When Farmer Grimshaw's back was turned, Quang returned to the farmhouse to pack her stuff, leaving a note for Farmer Grimshaw. The extraordinary thing about this story is that after Quang left for Thailand, it was like the Bigfoot knew I'd helped her, as I woke up one morning to find a large amethyst on the end of my bed, which I still treasure today. It's a magnificent piece, and when people ask me where I got it from, I usually just say, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." I do believe Bigfoots are telepathic. The creature knew I'd helped Quang. The amethyst was his way of thanking me. We never told Mr. Grimshaw that we'd helped Quang escape his clutches, nor has he ever mentioned to us that he got married twice, but we know more about him than he actually realizes. I'm sure my mother's absolutely right. There must be a sad story behind Mr. Grimshaw's life. But on the good side, if he hadn't been so miserable to Quang, I would never have encountered a Bigfoot who was so eager to help a lost, distressed soul that he audaciously entered my bedroom on a hot summer's night. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my Bigfoot encounter happened in 1989 when I was living in rural Tennessee with my husband Barry. We lived in a stunningly picturesque wooden log cabin on a hilly elevation that was flanked on every side with areas of emerald green forest that literally went back for hundreds of miles. In the distance you could see the high-rise mountains that towered majestically against the pale blue firmament. We lived well off the beaten track, with our nearest neighbours literally miles away. And despite the remoteness, I loved the solitude of my life. Quite literally, the deer and the mountain lions were my real neighbours, and I loved it that way. I had a huge passion and respect for nature, and I would spend all my spare time hiking and exploring the gorgeous countryside. I would also make regular trips to a beautiful pebbly stream that travailed through one of our wild areas of natural woodland, and there I would sit with my easel and my oils paints, surveying the beautiful scenery and painting magnificent scenes of nature. During the day my husband worked for a wealthy farmer in the local area, helping him with all kinds of jobs around his farm, and he did pay handsomely, as my husband was competent at all his outdoor jobs and exceedingly good with his hands. One day I got a dramatic telephone call from my sister Sylvia, who had suddenly fallen off her horse and broken a leg and a couple of ribs in a riding accident. Apparently the horse had become freaked out about a strange clanging sound it had heard, and subsequently it bucked her off his back, where her foot became entrenched in the syrup, and she had been dragged around the large meadow. She got off lightly, it would seem, in the circumstances, with only a few injuries, such as broken ribs. Let me assure you that a broken rib can be a massive setback for anyone, as pain can be relentless. She wondered in the circumstances if I wouldn't mind taking care of my 4.5-year-old niece, just for a few days, she assured me. It would appear that her usually competent au pair, who minded her kid, had run off with a boyfriend to Hawaii for a sunny break. Although I agreed to help, I did warn her that I wasn't confident of my skills as a babysitter, as I had no experience with children whatsoever, and I could not guarantee doing a great job. "Oh, it'll be a doddle," she assured me. "Kids aren't complicated. I'll get Mark," that was her husband, "to drop her off along with some of her toys, and she'll be good to go, I promise you that." My sister made it all sound terribly easy, but when Mark did drop off my 4.5-year-old niece at our countryside home, I found that she wasn't easy to manage at all. On the contrary, she was an absolute handful of unabated energy, and was always wandering off and getting easily distracted. I tried to occupy her with everything I could, like finger painting and moulding clay and even Lego blocks, but she pretty much became jaded and disinterested in everything that I presented her with. I have to admit that I became increasingly exasperated by my niece's constant need for stimulation. I suddenly developed a huge admiration for every single mother out there, and realized in horror that raising a kid has got to be the most laborious, arduous, and challenging job in the entire world, especially when there are kids that are Kayla's age to deal with. It was on a Friday morning when my niece was playing with her plastic telephone that I'd actually brought her from a toy shop, that luckily seemed to be holding her attention for longer than most of her toys had. She was talking on the fake phone, enjoying her little adult-like conversation. I heard her say, "You must smack him for being a very naughty boy." I smiled to myself and then went racing into the kitchen. I had forgotten to put the bread on timer, and I could smell the burnt charcoal all over the house. Everything was smoking, and my eyes were watering from the smoky vapours. I opened all the windows of the house to air the place. I could see my niece standing on the settee in the living area, with her back facing towards me. She was making strange, contorted faces at the window, and chuckling all the time. I was so pleased to see that finally she was entertaining herself. She was talking, giggling, and chuckling all the time. I smiled gratefully to myself. I had heard of kids having invisible friends before, and this clearly was one of those scenarios, I thought. That evening I prepared my niece fish fingers and potato chips, served with tomato sauce. She was playing with her food and dunking the fish finger into the tomato sauce and tucking it into her mouth with great gusto, staining the edges of her mouth with red stains. "Do you think Tommy would like fish fingers?" she asked me. "I'm sure he would," I said, assuming that Tommy was her invisible friend. "Then I'll save some for him," she said, putting a fish finger into her napkin and folding it up. I decided to overlook the fish finger and napkin incident, as clearly her invisible friend felt very real to her, and I knew if I kept the charade up, then maybe my niece would not be so demanding on me, as selfish as that does sound. I don't mind admitting to you that taking care of little Kyla was wearing me to the ground, and I was feeling physically drained and utterly exhausted. I tucked little Kayla up in her Snoopy-covered duvet with a little brown teddy bear tucked in her arms, and I read her a bedtime story about Water, the clever butterfly. With relief, I watched her falling off to deep sleep, but that was very short-lived, when during the night I was awoken to strange knocking sounds all over the house that sounded like someone was hitting the walls, which was profoundly odd. I could hear delightful squeals of laughter coming from Kayla's room, and I saw to my horror that she was jumping up and down on her bed in her Snoopy pyjamas, looking outside her window, saying, "Tommy is here! Tommy is here!" She appeared to be absolutely delighted. "I want to go outside to see Tommy," she said. "I want to play with him right now." Foolishly, I forgot about the strange knocks, and I tucked Kyla into bed, reassuring her that Tommy needed a good night's sleep, otherwise he would be very tired in the morning and would not want to play with her. At this, Kyla did listen, and she seemed satisfied and insisted on putting her fish finger on the outside window mantle for little Tommy to get later when he finally got hungry. I'm ashamed to say that my ignorance with children transcends to massive heights, relegating me to the very high rank of the worst possible babysitter in the entire world. I assure you that there were no intuitive alarm bells ringing in my head at this strange gesture of kindness from Kyla that bordered on the peculiar. I just thought it was normal that she was putting a fish finger out on the mantle. It was really bizarre that I should even think that. The following morning I was cleaning my rustic home that looked like a mini tornado had vandalised the entire living room, that was literally littered with Lego blocks, kids' drawings, baby dolls and tiny dolls' dresses that were literally scattered over every available surface. I picked up Kayla's toys, replacing them in a large cardboard box marked toys, and then I plumped up the cushions to gain some kind of respect on the sofas and started hoovering the carpet. Kayla was playing on her little tricycle yards away from me on the outer porch. I could hear the bicycle wheels squeaking on the wooden decking. Kayla was talking excitedly to her invisible friend, and I could hear her high-pitched voice squealing out in utter delight.
I've got a telephone. I can talk to you on my phone. I can call you.
I was laughing to myself. She was doing a great job in entertaining herself, I thought. And then I suddenly heard it, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was a strange chattering sound, unlike anything I've ever heard before, but it did have a monkey-like tone to it. It was very odd. For a moment I just froze to the spot, hardly daring to believe what I'd just heard. I tightened my hand on the hoover. Surely I was mistaken. Then I heard the chattering sound again. I switched off the droning sound of the hoover immediately and rushed over to the glass sliding doors to see who Kayla was actually talking to, and I could hardly believe what my eyes were witnessing. Kayla was talking to a little hairy ape-like humanoid that was about 3 feet tall and covered with red-brown hair all over its body, apart from its hazelnut-coloured face that was completely hairless. The creature had a bullet-shaped head, very distinctive prominent brow ridge, a wide flat nose, and very deep-set, lively yellow-brown eyes that did seem to sparkle brightly. Its demeanour was very excitable, and it seemed to be really revelling and enjoying Kayla's company. It wore an exuberant expression on its leathery brown face, which was animated, and his mouth was curled back to show off a glistening set of pearl-white teeth that appeared to be smiling. For a second I just froze to the spot, incapacitated by a stupefied horror rather than by fear. What was this thing, I wondered? I'd never seen a creature like this before. Should I be concerned? I hurriedly dashed through the sliding doors and grabbed Kayla off her little tricycle, lifting her into my arms quickly and bringing her indoors as fast as I could, bolting the doors behind me. What else was I supposed to do? Kayla was not amused by my actions, and she had a childlike tantrum and hissy fit.
I want to play with Tommy. I want to play with Tommy. I want to play with Tommy. I want to play with Tommy,
she said, stamping her tiny little feet in a gesture of defiant insubordination.
I want to play with Tommy. Why aren't you letting me play with Tommy?
Ignoring my niece, I went over to the glass sliding door, and staring out of the sheer glass panel, I found myself looking directly into the eyes of the little ape-like humanoid, who was staring back at us with a look of curious intrigue all over his face.
Go away, I said. Go away, creature. Go away. Go away.
I tried to make gestures for the creature to leave, but the creature chattered so excitedly, and it began to mimic my gestures and impersonated my serious facial expressions, clearly believing that this was all a terribly exciting game. I remember grabbing a large bunch of bananas, because I knew monkeys liked bananas, and that was my first reaction. and I threw them out of the window, falsely believing that the little humanoid would just dash off with them and hopefully run back into the forests where he must have come from, I thought. But the creature grabbed the bananas and started to eat them on the wooden deck, cramming them into his mouth, including the skins, and he made some very satisfied, appreciative grunts. Mmm, mmm, mmm. I could hear a whistling sound from the valley, and I saw this colossal creature literally gliding towards our cabin, and her movements were seamless, agile, and flawless, and she bounded over the wooden railing with the agility of a domestic cat. She bolted towards her little youngling with a furious look written on her face. She looked like a mother who was exasperated with her naughty child, and she was standing on our wooden deck, chattering away to the creature in a high-pitched voice. I could sense that she was reprimanding the youngling and giving him a huge telling off, and he appeared to be hanging his little head in shame, looking incredibly despondent. The mother was utterly magnificent. I know of no other words to describe her, because she towered at 9 feet tall and weighed at least 800 pounds, and she was majestic, lofty, powerful, and imposing. She was covered from head to toe with long red-brown hair that glistened magnificently in the beams and the shafts of sunlight. Her body was dense with sinewy muscular definition, and in worldly terms she was simply ripped, but she did appear to have a pair of firm breasts and a very evident maternal demeanour. Her long primate-like arms lifted up the little humanoid, where its legs clasped loosely around her slender hips. Suddenly she looked up as she sensed me watching her, with a look of sheer astonished enchantment on my face. For a moment our eyes just locked together, and it was like we connected, and I almost sensed that she was apologising for her youngling's behaviour. Her beautiful yellow-brown eyes registered such sharp intelligence, and I watched her hopping over the wooden banisters and gliding into the woods seamlessly. She only glanced back once in my direction, very briefly, as if she was saying goodbye. I knew very suddenly that the little youngling would not be troubling us any more. It was such a very powerful, intuitive feeling that came over me like a very instinctive revelation. My little niece was very upset and angry with me. She was upset that little Tommy was not there to play with her, and she persistently complained, "I want Tommy to play with me. I want Tommy to play with me. You made him go away. Why did you make him go?" I asked her why she called the creature Tommy. "'Cause he told me," she said. "How could he tell you if he doesn't speak our language?" I asked her. "'Cause he speaks into your head, silly." It was then that I was convinced that these creatures have some kind of clear telepathic ability, because I had literally sensed the mother apology, an assurance to me that had appeared like crystal clear words in my mind. She told me in my mind that Tommy would not be bothering us again, that she would make sure of that. Believe me, she fulfilled her promises, because I never saw those creatures again, much to my bitter disappointment. After these strange set of circumstances that had come to pass in my life, I developed a particular longing to encounter the creatures again, which I have learnt is very common among observers of these creatures, many who might spend their entire lifetime seeking out another encounter with the elusive, hairy humanoid. After Kyla returned home, everything around my home returned to normal. I looked out for those phenomenal creatures, but sadly I never ever saw them again. But I do know for sure that these marvellous creatures are out there, roaming the forests of North America. And that is one thing I know for certain. Bear in mind that this was in the early 80s, so when I did tell my husband what I'd seen, he was convinced I'd seen something else like a hairy vagrant living in the woods, or a bear. I did tell him that the vagrant would clearly have had to have a major problem with excessive body hair, if that had been the case, but my husband remained convinced that it had in fact been a man that I had seen. I remember reconciling myself that there was no way I could convince anyone in what I'd seen, because people would never believe my story, and I just had to live with that. It was only a decade or so later that I learnt the creatures that I'd seen were known as Sasquatches or Bigfoots. I was never once frightened by the creatures, but I assure you it was only because the ones I encountered were so warm, human-like and incredibly friendly. I am, however, in absolutely no doubt that should the creature have been aggressive towards me, that would have been a very terrifying experience, because I want to tell you they are apex predators without a doubt, and they do command great respect. Like human beings, I imagine they come in all shapes, sizes, colours and personalities. Kyla has now grown up into a beautiful young woman, but has no recollection of her encounter with the hairy humanoid that she encountered when she was 4.5 years old, which is such a pity. However, if you ask her today if she believes in the mystery elusive creature known as Bigfoot, she certainly does believe he's real. And I think that she feels this way because somewhere in the back of her mind, she knows that he is. And that is my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.